Thanks.
All right, we're going to call the City Council City Manager work session to order for a conversation around temporary emergency shelter zoning. If you are watching this online, which you should be able to observe this online, there won't be any public comment during the work session as usual, but we will have some public comment and an availability to call in during the regular meeting. That phone number, you can call in remotely, dialing 1-855-552-4463. Use meeting ID number 775-468-5399. And when told to do so, we'll ask for a *7. And that will let you into the queue so we can entertain your public comment. So we'll start off this evening, though, talking about the temporary emergency shelter zoning. And I think, Clint, you were kind of sent home with some homework, and you are back today to kind of present your recommendations or suggestions.
Exactly, yeah. The City Council was approached earlier this year from an outfit called the Stepping Stones with the idea of creating basically a homeless shelter on property owned by the Agape House that's out on West Harper Road. And I immediately went into the zoning code to see how something like that would fit into our zoning code. And right now, we don't really have a good definition for that type of a use. And so kind of had to look at it and thought, how are other communities doing it? What is actually going on here? And what are the potential ramifications of that? After kind of considering that, decided that the best thing to call it, rather than being a homeless shelter, to make it have the most broad applicability within the city, to call it a temporary emergency shelter. That, first off, it takes out any kind of residential connotation to it, and also allows it to be to be used for other places in there. So what I'm going to go through tonight is kind of the draft code that we've come up with our land use council and I, and just going to run through those provisions. But to kind of give you just some background on it, when this would be a code amendment into the zoning code. And so whenever you're doing a code amendment, you have to think of all the potential users and all the potential ramifications of that type of insertion into the code with language. This one, as we said, specifically targets a homeless population. But a future user, say Red Cross, could want to do a flood relief center of the same type of configuration. There's a lot of other type of emergency shelter uses that would fit in under this. And where do we want to put a thing like that? After looking at overall what we had, I thought probably the city's light industrial zone is going to be the best area to put it. The light industrial zoning puts it further away from any residential uses, which might create resident conflicts. But then there is a trade-off, because being in an industrial zone could create a different type of conflict with noise, odor, putting people who are trying to stay in an area may have a conflict with industrial users down the road. So that's something the council will want to think about. From a pure logistical standpoint, the code draft that you have in front of you inserts this language into the conditional use list of our M1 zone, the light industrial zone. Conditional uses require a public hearing before the Planning Commission before any permit is issued. The conditional use has two real benefits. One, it increases citizen and neighbor participation in the process. It also increases the ability of the city to provide oversight for how a shelter is operating. we put some pretty specific design standards into the code. The idea behind having a set of design standards to follow rather than just saying an emergency shelter would be a conditional use is that it creates a concrete set of rules that are consistently applied to any proposed shelter that might come into the city. And as people come in with this type of business model, they can understand the baseline costs, that these are the things that the city is always going to require of you. And that helps them to develop their grant funding and things like that. Let's dive right into the design standards, and feel free to provide feedback on each one. I've already received some feedback from the community, from city staff, stepping stones, and I'll bring those up as we come to them. But I'm just going to go through line by line what the design standards are that we're proposing. The first one is a temporary emergency shelter shall be designed as a central community building for the provision of services to the residents, and a series of detached shelters providing overnight accommodations for the residents. Staff facilities, offices, food storage, etc. shall be within the central community building. Second one, the portion of the development site containing the community building and temporary emergency shelters shall be enclosed with an 8-foot chain link fence equipped with site obscuring slats. The operator shall be responsible for the permanent maintenance of the fence. After some research, fencing really can be any height. So there's already a 6-foot chain link fence with at least one course of barbed wire around it that encloses the Agape House property. That's the sort of thing that, from a feedback standpoint, as the council gets into developing policy, do you want the 8-foot fence? Do you want a 10-foot fence? Is a 6-foot fence okay? I've checked with the police department, and they say they can pretty much see the same amount of security from a 6 as an 8.
Is it's 6 feet and then the barbed wire on the top, or?
Yes.
Okay, so then that makes it how high?
About 7.
Okay.
Is that the same, the neighbor to the east, is that the same size fence that he has around his property?
I have not investigated his fence.
Well, there's a fence that abuts the Agape House on the eastern western.
Yeah, I have not been out to the site to actually look at how tall his fence is.
So how do you know what the size of the fence is around the Agape House?
Stepping Stones told me.
They told you that, okay.
The facility shall be sited on property owned by a registered nonprofit agency or a local county, state, or federal government agency. Qualifying nonprofit agency is defined as a 501c3 registered with the IRS and considered active by the IRS during the current tax year. This is, again, something that you might want to think about from a policy standpoint. Does it need to be nonprofit? Could someone other than that want to do that, a for-profit agency or somebody who has industrial property but says, I'm not using my back 5 acres? Yeah, that's more of a policy question. But for the purposes of our first draft on the code, thought that we would do it basically with as it sits now with a nonprofit. Or, if the county or county housing authority, for instance, or a federal government, FEMA, wanted to come in and do something if they owned land, that was kind of the underlying logic there. Facility shall be considered an accessory use to existing permitted industrial uses on the property. A temporary emergency shelter is not a residential use under the definitions of ORS 197-303. In the event no permitted uses are occurring on the property or the property is otherwise vacant, the use shall not be allowed. This is really getting to the heart of trying to protect our industrial zoning because that is our employment land. So any time that we're trying to create a shelter situation, we want to make sure that it's not something that's going to be really impacting our ability to supply land for 20-year employment needs. And so it can be an accessory use to an industrial use that's on a property. In this case, the Agape House's property's main use is defined as warehousing because that's the main thing that goes on in that building, which is an industrial use. But if it were completely vacant, then we are letting our employment land be potentially taken away. And then we also just threw that residential use under the definitions of ORS 197-303 in there, because the city is required to provide housing for a 20-year supply. And this isn't really intended to be permanent housing. So we don't want, in our code, we want to make it clear that this is not intended to be a permanent residential structure that we then have to account for in the future.
Does this exempt landlord this from the landlord tenant, or do we need to do this?
We will probably need to clarify that. And the legislature during the 2020 session was doing some very specific things on homelessness and landlord-tenant exemptions, but nothing got passed. So I'm not sure how it actually sits. In terms of spacing, that facility shall be located at least 1,000 feet from any public or private elementary, junior high, or high school, and at least 1,000 feet from another temporary emergency shelter, as measured from the closest property line to closest property line. This is just intended to create real buffers around, not only from sensitive uses like schools, but from any potential shelters that may be located. You wouldn't want to have a large cluster of them all in one area. So we developed 1,000-foot spacing from each shelter as well as from some of those sensitive uses. Facility shall contain at least one community building containing shower facilities and permanent restrooms. Showers shall be provided at a ratio of 1 shower for every 10 shelters, and toilets shall be provided at a ratio of 1 toilet for every 8 shelters. Excuse me. Wrong pipe. I was working with the building official on this one. These ratios of showers and toilets are what we currently apply for RV parks. And so we thought that would probably be a good starting point for this type of a use. Again, this is the one that really gets down into policy. If the council felt that another ratio, fewer or even more, might be appropriate, that would be a point of discussion, as well as when they should be provided. This code, as it's written, means that the showers and toilets need to be there on day one. And the proposals that you've had from Stepping Stones have the showers and toilets in phase 2. And so that's, again, a policy decision that the council would want to discuss, if it's possible to delay that sort of thing. From my standpoint, that's a real health and safety issue. And so it's really important to have a good, clean environment on day one.
How could you give occupancy to something that didn't have the adequate facilities like that?
That's a good question. And in my conversation with the building official, he wasn't sure that it would actually be possible.
Okay.
Could you do temporary porta potties as a alternative initially?
Theoretically, you could, yes.
And then if they proved access to showering facilities temporarily, some sort of timeline to be met. Yeah. The challenge is once people are there, it's hard to keep them back out.
Yeah.
When they don't meet the timeline. But also being sensitive to budgets and this being a shoestring budget, you know, to make sure that we can afford, or they can afford to do something. Looking at alternatives to help still meet safety standards, because I do agree that they should have access to restroom facilities as well as bathing and showering facilities would be a plus.
One of the advantages of doing this through the conditional use process is that you have the code that's established, but then as you go to the permitting process with the planning commission, there is that ability to do a little horse trading. And the planning commission can say, you know, okay, within 180 days of when you open, the restrooms need to be completed, or within 18 months. The planning commission has the ability to do that sort of horse trading as part of that.
Yeah. So is there a maybe a better recommendation in the way of toilets and showers, maybe through
like the Red Cross, some of the entities that actually do this type of thing as a matter of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, does the Red Cross have a when they do emergency sheltering, do they have a nominal number for that?
I can research that and find out.
I think that would be a good starting point, is going from somebody that actually does it to get you on, to give you a good place to start. Yeah.
One of the things I was just thinking about, Byron, there's a agency through the state that sells surplus items. In fact, that's what we obtained our bus stops. Is it possible to ask them if they have surplus shower facilities or restroom facilities that we could acquire, and that could potentially be a contribution the city could make? Because I don't know that an entity, a private entity, could purchase from it.
Right, no, only government agencies can, but yeah, we can look, that their inventory is always changing.
Right.
So, we would have to watch.
Or just give them an item
but
and say,
they're
hey, this is what
good.
we're looking for.
Yeah, they're good to watch for items if, if you get a list, so we could definitely.
Well, what's the timeline again between phase 1 and phase 2?
That I don't have. We would have to specifically ask them. They are here tonight. And I think they will want to come up and give some feedback after I'm done. Individual shelter units shall not be serviced with water, sewer, or electrical. All facilities for the health and wellness of residents shall be furnished within the community building. This is in line with their plan. And also, as we thought about it, we thought this is actually a pretty good idea as far as not making the sites too comfortable, but making them adequate for a temporary use, essentially. All temporary shelter units shall be removed within 60 days of the termination of the primary permitted use. Community building may remain at the property owner's discretion. In the event the shelter ceases operation, all shelter units shall be removed within 60 days. So if the primary industrial use leaves, you no longer have an accessory use. So that's why we have the 60 days there. But also, should the operation fold entirely, then all the shelters need to go as well within 60 days. But the community building represents pretty substantial capital investment. So that can remain should the property owner consent to it. That's the intent there. This one is a little controversial, but I'm in favor of it. Due to the transitory nature of residents and staff in the temporary emergency shelter, parking spaces designed and constructed in compliance with our zoning standards are not required, and gravel parking may be utilized. However, no portion of any parking area nor any other portion of the property may be used for the storage of vehicles in excess of 24 hours. So this is a big thing for the city. Should we go down this road, we're actually waiving the paved parking requirement. This is catering to a clientele that does not necessarily have vehicles, so I don't necessarily feel that paved parking is incredibly crucial in this, but we also don't want it to become a de facto junkyard, so put in the no storage of vehicles in excess of 24 hours.
So it may not be a vehicle, it could be a cart or something that be considered a parking place.
The way I have it written is just vehicles.
Okay.
So it wouldn't, so a cart or something could be stored there longer.
Some of our homeless people, families, are car-bound. They're homeless in their car. So if they wanted to stay in the shelter, what would they do with their vehicle?
It would probably be very similar to our parking ordinances that we have now, which is, and we could consider that as well, changing it to 72 hours instead of 24 hours, just immediately up that. But even if the vehicle just moves from one side of the street to the other, that satisfies it's not being stored on the street requirement. So I think as long as the vehicle moves every now and then, it would be the same situation here.
How about a permit type situation? Like if they are people who are staying there
Mhm.
and they have a car, they could have a permit for, a few weeks at a time and have to register their permit
Okay,
forever long. I don't know.
we can research that. That's a good idea.
Make sure the car's operational too, and
Right.
not just broken down.
Don't they have to leave every day? Every day?
They do have to vacate every day.
So I would think they would want to be there.
That's true.
If they have gas, put in it.
Yeah.
If they have gas to put in, they may not use their car for transportation.
But if they had a permit, they could come back.
Yeah. A permitted vehicle would not be considered stored, I would
Right.
think. So that's,
And that would take that part out of the equation then. Or it could.
we will research that one too and see. It's a good thought. A couple of them, a fenced pet area of at least 200 square feet shall be provided, and pet waste shall be contained within this area and deposited in an appropriate receptacle. Again, a lot of times clientele may have a dog or something, and so it's important to have a place to exercise it and to let the dog do their business. So that really think it's important to include that in the overall design.
Can we be more specific about a sanitary or humane, or using some sort of terminology that specifies that this is an appropriate place for a pet to, go to the bathroom, but also isn't going to leave a stench or stain for a neighborhood
Okay.
smell, that sort of something.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's irrigatable or got to be cleaned up within 24 hours or, something like that. I want it to create a health hazard.
Yeah.
I want-
I know discussed that they're gonna allow pets with the clients that come into the church.
Maybe you can ask them when they come up.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
See, now this is another one of those situations where it's important to remember, once you put something in the code, everybody can take advantage of it. So even if Stepping Stones has a no pet policy, if Red Cross a year from now wants to come in and create a fire shelter for Eastern Oregon or something and say, you can go to Hermiston, they would have clientele with pets. So something to think about. Even if the one that you're considering now doesn't have it, you have to think how future users might also look at it.
I think our intent, though, with this conversation was trying to be as particular as possible about this specific piece of property to limit the amount of opportunities that this code would be actually utilized by others.
That is true.
So I don't know how many other people are going to take advantage of this code.
And that was my question earlier to you, was how do we know?
Yeah. And that's just it. It is very narrowly tailored to be on a 501c3's property or in a government agency's property. And so that eliminates 95% of the land within the city from the running, but that doesn't eliminate everything except for this lot. And one thing we've learned is, boy, the laws of unintended consequences can really come back. Next one, each temporary emergency shelter unit shall be provided with a lockable external storage unit for the overnight secure storage of resident possessions. Next one, drugs and alcohol, with the exception of prescription medications accompanied by a doctor's prescription, shall not be allowed at any location on the premises. Operator shall initiate random spot checks for drugs and alcohol at regular intervals. And in the event drugs or alcohol are found on the premises, any resident found in possession shall be removed from the property and report shall be made to the police department. This one I've had some feedback on already, noting especially that alcohol is not actually illegal. So it should probably be just drugs, with the exception of prescription medications accompanied by a doctor's prescription. That can be their policy not to allow alcohol, but from a city standpoint, alcohol is legal, and just eliminate the third bullet entirely and just say that the operator shall initiate random spot checks. If they want to exclude somebody, that's up to them rather than the city code requirement.
Well, the chief can, yes, describe this more specifically, but open containers are illegal. So unless this is alcohol bottle or can that's non-opened, an appropriate packaging or whatever, it's illegal. So these people would have to bring in something that they purchased at the liquor store, I guess, and not have opened it into the facility. But I think they have rules against alcohol facility anyway, but.
Yeah, because they couldn't, I don't think they could, you can't consume alcohol on an unlicensed premise, which would that would make this.
And I don't know if this is like a provision, maybe we could add it here, or maybe this is something with the organization stepping stones would have to do. I do, like, if people do find, or if they do find any drugs or alcohol, they're supposed to leave or vacate. However, it would also be nice if this person maybe was referred or sent to treatment one way or the other, because if this person is in this situation with nothing else and is probably still using drugs, this person probably has issues more than just, the legal issues, and it might be a reoccurring circle. So I don't know if this is a policy thing that we put in as a city or something that Stepping Stones would have to do. If there is a client that has to be discharged for not following the rules, I think that's something that should be put in place, or I would highly recommend.
Or could be offered, but you can't require.
I think that would be great. Yeah, at least somewhere to try to curb any of that. I think offering it.
I think something like that, it would be really difficult to put into a zoning provision, but it could be put into any kind of memorandum of understanding that accompanies funding or something like that. If the city were to provide funds, a policy situation like that, that would be the more appropriate venue for that. Next one, we want to be very clear, temporary
Manuel
emergency.
When you move, are you gonna add, the day being removed immediately?
We're recommending removing the removal clause entirely.
And I ask this question because, I'm working with domestic violence, and when somebody violates the drug and alcohol, we remove them immediately. Pack your stuff and you out. Because you need to think about it. You put it in danger all the families.
Gary, is there a legal recourse there? We can't maybe mandate immediate removal? Or-
Yeah, there's a problem with a government agency or, demanding policies that are, I guess don't quite fit. I mean, for example, that should not be alcohol on the premises. I mean, it is a legal substance. So we'd have to look into that more. But the agency itself or the group itself, they could say if they want to come here and participate in our program and have alcohol, and they could have it doable.
As Clint suggested, as a part of our participation, we could ask them, that's part of their rules, not put it in code.
Right, yeah. It's just like the federal government, they can't tell states what to do, but if you want some money, this is what you have to do if you want to get the money,
Thank you.
Moving on, temporary emergency shelter units are subject to all applicable building codes, and a battery-operated smoke detector shall be provided in each unit, and each unit shall have at least one door and one emergency egress window. This is another one that comes straight from our building official, that having two ways out of each building is absolutely essential. So just a door is not going to be good enough. Outdoor lighting shall be provided. Lighting shall be oriented to prevent direct illumination onto abutting properties. This is the city's standard code for designing exterior lighting on any commercial structure or parking lot. You need to make sure that it's shielded so that it only points down. Occupancy of the facility shall be limited to no more than 60 persons, including staff, per night. Total shelters on site shall be limited to no more than 45. Occupancy of each shelter shall be no more than 2 persons. So the math doesn't quite work there, but that's intended because not every unit might have 2 people. So if you have 45 shelters, you still only have 60 people. So you have 30 with 1 person in them, 15 with 2, or whatever. Just to make sure that we're not overcrowding the facility.
What about when somebody comes with children?
That's what do you do with an extra child?
They're gonna be 2 persons, gonna be more.
From what I remember of their business plan when it was submitted last time, was that it would be like a mom and kids would be in the permanent shelter units, and then they were going to have overflow tents that the men would sleep in. I think
we'll let them answer that question.
Yeah.
So, Quentin, I guess the question I have is why the number limit? I mean, where does that number come from?
Basically just trying to prevent overcrowding or too much accumulation in any one location.
Is there some sort of definition of what's safe or acceptable, sanitary, humane space per square foot? I don't know. I guess 60 just seems like a random number out of the air.
That pretty much is I tried to come up with a cap on it, and that's where
based on the square footage that this space would occupy.
Yeah, basically. Okay. But it's again a policy decision. The council can move those around. Facility shall be used for sheltering residents from half an hour before dusk each night until 8:30 a.m. the following day. All residents shall vacate the facility each day no later than 8:30 a.m. The hours between resident vacation and resident admission shall be used for site maintenance and cleaning. And temporary emergency shelters shall be subject to an annual review by the Planning Commission, subject to the standards for a conditional use permit. Annual review is in a public hearing, and the Planning Commission may modify conditions of approval or revoke a conditional use permit for a temporary emergency shelter upon finding that the operator has not met the conditional use permit standards of this chapter. That's some language that we've actually kind of learned is pretty helpful with our conditional use permits overall. We've had some conditional use permits where people weren't living up to them and we didn't have a good mechanism to go in. So from this one, it's going to be clear right from the beginning, the Planning Commission has the ability to modify conditions of approval or revoke the permit if something is not happening. Any operator of a temporary emergency shelter shall notify the city manager in writing at least 30 days prior to termination of operations. Notice of termination shall include the final date of operation and establish a schedule for the removal of shelters. Remember, 60 days after they're done, the site needs to be cleaned up. So that's where that's going. And that is the end.
Quentin, I have one follow-up question on the time. Again, I'm not sure where the time comes from, half hour before dusk. That may be 9:30 in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Could be 4:30 in the winter. So, I mean, can we be a little more specific on that?
Actually, the reason I went with that was just from my own experience dealing with when parks close, when I'm out fishing and stuff, that generally they say gates close half an hour before dusk is generally how parks are set up. So I thought that would be a good starting point for that. And yeah, I'm open to modifying the time. But that allows the time to switch as they have more and less daylight and people want to come in whenever it's getting dark.
Maybe you want to come in soon.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Clint?
Well, we mentioned drugs and alcohol, but what about weapons? I mean, that's pretty much a given, but do we want to have it in the, we want to have something about weapons? I'm sure.
Gary, I'm gonna put that one on to you because, as you said, alcohol is legal and some weapons are legal. Is that something that would be better as a policy rather than a code, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're getting into, I'm sure out on the street, some of these people, I'm sure, carry weapons with them, and if it's, they're confronted or something. I mean, we have to look at that, but perhaps they, would have a policy that they return their weapons in. I don't know, in order to enter, and then they could pick them up and they left again. That would be something that I think would be addressed during the hearing on this. That should be something. See how they would handle that.
I mean, it would be,
And then we could look at, but unless they're asking for that they would ask the city, to include such a clause like that. Somebody carrying a knife and this and that, I mean, it could be, I don't know. And they don't like the night manager telling them what to do or whatever, or the guy next door snoring too loud. There could be problems there. So I'd be interested to see how they want to address that before we begin in the abstract making rules about what they should do.
I agree with that perspective. I don't know if the city wants to get into policy of creating law and taking away people's rights. If they want to make it a policy as far as participation, that's something different. So I think being more restrictive than the average person on the street can.
They may have a better idea of how to handle that.
Yeah.
I just think that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and we want to get their input on that and see what that takes us.
Agreed.
I'd be a little bit leery about having somebody coming in with alcohol and when they have some kind of disagreement, things go south really quick. I'm real concerned about that.
Yeah, and I'm sure they are too.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we want a code for it.
Right, but
That's the point.
yeah, but I just don't know if we need to be putting that in the code at this time in the abstract. I'd like to hear how they plan to deal with that type of situation.
So long as it's addressed, right? So long as it's addressed.
Yeah, right, so we have some
Yeah.
understanding about it.
Yeah, I think the city council in the conversation that they have with Stepping Stones can request some certain requirements of the facility as far as our participation is done. But I don't think we want it in code.
No, I mean, they have the oversight of it, so therefore it would be, kind of their responsibility
We can
to.
address that in policy.
Right.
Well, they may want that in the code because then that gives them some lever to say, well, it's in the code and we risk, blah, 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 you need to. So this is the reason why we do that, that might give them an out, I think. So, but we'd have to think about that, let's see what they have to say. I don't just want to jump to any conclusions about what it is we have, or what the council ought to recommend until we do.
So what's the process of this, Clint? This is the initial presentation.
This is an initial presentation. We're tentatively scheduling this for hearings for adoption in July. Depending on the feedback we get tonight and from the Planning Commission on Wednesday, that may move back a month.
So this is going in front of the Planning Commission first. They've got to approve it and then bring it back to council
Correct.
for adoption. Okay, so there's going to be 2 sessions.
There's a work session tonight with the City Council. There's a work session Wednesday night with the Planning Commission to get feedback on the code, and then it would move to a hearing process at the July Planning Commission and then the second meeting in July for the City Council.
So it's only got to go through one approval, planning, two at council? No,
Just one, just one, depending on how you vote.
Well, the ordinance would have to be adopted by the city first before they can get a conditional use.
Correct. So
Right.
that's
So then the second hearing, like I think what you're thinking of is the conditional use permit. If the ordinance gets adopted as
yes.
putting it as a conditional use permit, then they go back to the planning commission and request a permit to do it on that specific property. Right now, you're writing the policy for how this would be anywhere that meets the requirements of the code.
And then that second hearing at the Planning Commission, that's one where we do landowner notifications, posting on the property, notices in the paper, things like that. And then you have the concrete development proposal that then gets reviewed by the Planning Commission, rather than the more abstract code that we're dealing with tonight.
So the council will have multiple opportunities throughout the course of the next couple of months to think some more about this and come up with some recommendations or suggestions.
If you think that July is moving too fast for the code, let me know and we can slow it down. I mean, that's one thing.
Kind of pretty gray right now, I think. Seems like
Interested to see what the planning commission feel about it.
Yeah.
I think it's important to have stepping stones come up and provide some feedback too. While we're here, I'll just stay here, but if
Yeah.
when I come up here.
You want to come and sit up here?
Oh, sure.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
You want to introduce yourself
It's getting to
again?
be a habit. I'm Kathy Lloyd, and I am the chairperson for Stepping Stones Board of Directors.
Welcome.
So all of the information was provided to me, a copy of it, and most of it we don't have a problem with. There's a couple of rural areas that we did want to see if we could tweak a little bit. The suggestion, the main one is the showers and the permanent bathrooms, because that's a big financial area. The Commons building that already sits on the property, and that's actually owned by Agape House, and they're willing to include that as part of their rent, has 2 permanent toilets, toilets and cap bathrooms. Agape House has 2 showers. So currently what we do at the warming station is that we, certain nights of the week, we give vouchers to those. The showers cost $1 up at Agape House. Warming station provides vouchers. And so while ideally, if we have enough money, yes, in conjunction with Agape House, we would like to have a 4-shower unit there on the property. But that's a big money item. And so, our proposal would be if we can put in there that within a certain amount of time that we would have that shower unit. Because ideally we want to have the shower unit and laundry facilities so that clothing and such could be washed. And this is something that Agape House is interested in having as well. And visiting with Kathy Putnam, this is something she'd be willing to make a joint effort on both of our parts to be able to have that, because we do want to. But we also recognize the fact that it's expensive. At the warming station, we have 1 bathroom with 1 toilet, and no showers available. And so, we would like you to take into consideration the financial aspect. Yes, that is definitely something we want, but we'd like to be able to open without that. And we'd also like to be able to, in the interim time, to be able to add porta pots as needed to cover that extra population. Because you said, 1 toilet per 8? Yeah. And so, we'd look at putting in, probably 2 more porta pots and the company cleans them on a regular basis. The rent on that's quite a bit less than a shower unit. Yes,
But you would have, upon, occupancy, when you are ready to open and you've got people coming in, you would have the ability to have a shower for them at the Agape House, right?
at the Agape
Okay.
House during the daytime,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, during the operating hours for Agape House, and they do have two, and we would be more than willing to provide vouchers for residents that want to go there during the daytime and take a shower.
Yeah, that was my concern,
Yeah.
is upon your opening,
Right.
they would
Yes.
have access to the
Yes,
shower.
we can
Okay.
already take
All
care
right.
of that,
You
you
could potentially, limit the number of shelters you build initially until you can afford to buy more showers. as
Right,
well.
but we still wouldn't necessarily have the shower unit. The shower unit's going to cost as much as several huts. And we've got a lot of people willing to donate money to buy a hut, or to pay for the materials for a hut. The shower unit's going to be a little bit bigger effort. But yes, upon opening, we can provide the vouchers for showers. We'll have the 2 flushing toilets, and then, given permission, we would have two porta pots on site.
Because even as it sits right now, you could have 20 shelters.
Yeah. Right.
Maybe start.
But we don't have any showers without using the Agape
Voucher
House.
system.
Yeah.
And you've already worked that out with them?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, anyone can go up to Agape House and for $1 buy a shower.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's not a special arrangement. That's something that Agape House provides.
Okay.
Okay. The other, yeah, it's good to know.
Who knew?
It beats taking a shower at the car wash, and
Lori has a question.
yes, sorry.
So is that considered leaving the shelter to go to Gabi House?
That's why they would have to shower during the daytime.
That's considered leaving the.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Kathy and I talked, we do not want Agape House individuals having access into the Stepping Stones area during the daytime, nor do we want Stepping Stones individuals having access to Agape House area during the nighttime.
Okay.
And we're both, she and I are pretty adamant on that. It is, in terms of the drugs and alcohol, that is within the rules that we are setting for Stepping Stones, is no drugs, alcohol or weapons are allowed in, whether it's opened or not. It's just not allowed.
How are you going to manage that?
No.
Because we can set the rules.
No, but what are you going to do with those individuals?
Pardon me?
What are you going to do with those individuals?
If they have it,
Yeah.
it's not going to come into the area.
But what are they going to
We
do
do a
with
check.
a weapon while they,
Okay, so
if they
what
need
we've
to
done,
check
and
in?
the only weapons that I'm aware of that we've had, like at the warming station, are pocket knives. And so we take that and secure that for the night.
So you will take them and put them, okay.
If it's something like that,
And they own up to it.
pardon me?
And they own up to it, because you're not doing a
Right.
search on them.
Right. No, what we do is we ask them to show us. We certainly don't strip search them, but we do ask at the warming station, can you show me what you've got in your pockets? Can you show me what you have? And if they are adamant about refusing, then they're refused admission. Let's
Sorry,
see.
Kathy, one more other question about that.
Yes.
Some people had asked, and I think really specifically about service availability. So if you
Say
do
that again.
service availability for drug and alcohol counseling, so if you do identify somebody that's a user or an abuser, do you have access, or will you have access or recommendations for those individuals? Because I think part of this process is not only to provide a warm, safe place to be,
Right.
but it's to also hopefully transition them, right? It's stepping stones for a reason.
Exactly.
So how do we transition them from that user or abuser into a more productive member of the community? And just kicking them out isn't the answer.
So there's two parts to that answer. One is the fact that we are looking at the exit homelessness program that Walla Walla is running. They did not institute it until that second year. And so that's why we put it in as a phase 2, to give us time to get an individual trained to be able to provide that information. The hospital has the Connections program, and so that exit homelessness manager is very similar to the Connections program. So with the hospital, what they do is they've got individuals that will find out who needs help with transportation, who needs help with insulin and sugar monitoring, different health situations. And then that Connections manager helps them get the services they need. That's what that exit homelessness manager will do as well. They're going to take a look and say, as they get to know the people that are wanting to stay over a longer period of time, what are their needs? What is the stumbling block for them being able to be self-reliant? What is the reason that they continue to be homeless? Sometimes it's just something very temporary, but when it's a longer term thing, then that's when we're going to look at, do they need to get their GED? Do they need to get some vocational training? Do they need to get some mental health counseling? Do they need to go into drug rehab? And that exit homelessness manager is going to help them tap into the resources that are available.
I think,
and to us, that's why it's a stepping stone. It's not a handout, it's meant to be a handout.
and I think that's what I've heard from the council is probably the most appealing part of this. We're not interested in encouraging people to come to our community to have a warm place to stay. We want to help people that are within our community transition from maybe non-productive society members to productive society members. And so that part of that, I think, is what I've heard from my council is the most important part. And so I think that has to be something that we put a timeline on as far as.
And we completely agree with that. Because to us, when we look at the success rate that the Walla Walla program's having, that's what's exciting. When we look at the success rate there in Joplin of Watered Garden, that's what's exciting about it, is that this is not meant to be anybody's permanent home. That's why we don't want utilities within each of those huts. We want it to be a place that they're going to sleep at night, and then in the morning they're going to go out. So whether they put time in as a volunteer, cleaning things up, or whether they put time in at a drug rehab, but they're going to have to make efforts.
Before you ask a question, you've got 8 minutes. Okay, I want to make sure we get all your issues answered and the questions answered. But Doug, do you have a comment?
Yeah, you talked a lot about the volunteers on this, and that brings up a huge question for me that I didn't get a chance to ask you the last time around. One of the problems that the homeless shelter has is it wasn't able to open some nights because it didn't have sufficient volunteers. Is that going to be the case with this?
That's something that we're working on really hard to make sure that we get covered. A large portion of that is getting that through the night coverage, and that's why we're going with someone hired to be able to provide those services. We're going to run that through Atkinson Staffing, so they will hire through them and be able to have nighttime coverage. So one, we're needing a lot less volunteer services. We're needing it at check-in and check-out. And then we're developing a list of organizations, churches that are willing to cover a certain number of nights a month that they would make sure that they have those volunteers there. We're also looking at putting our training online so that it's much easier to get our volunteers trained for those individuals who have difficulty getting to a specific training session. And that kind of like a food handler's license, you can go on any day, anytime, and get that training and get it signed off, and then you'll have to do volunteer with a trained individual with experience before you're going to be approved. So yeah, we're very aware of that, and so that is something we're working actively on, and I think we've got a good plan in place to be able to cover that.
Okay, the question still remains, will you open if you don't have somebody there to check them in and
No.
check them out?
No, if we don't have the coverage, no, we would not open. We've got to have that supervision. But I think we've got some really good ways to accomplish that supervision. The only other thing that I would like to see is on the secured storage unit, I'd like to take out the word overnight. Because I would like those individuals that are staying for more, for continuous nights to be able to store their items there in a locked unit during the daytime so that they don't have to carry it all with them. So that,
Okay.
but it would be locked and secured. So that was one that I just wanted to pull that out. And then I did want to make sure that, I know Clint and I had visited a little bit, that there could be more than one community building on that property. So rather than one enormous one, because we're looking at a separate building for the shower and laundry room. We'd have the common building for where they can come in, sit at a table, charge their phones or whatever. And then eventually we'd like to have that educational unit so that we'd have computers and stuff there that they would be able to work on their classes or whatever they're taking.
And I had put in the code at least one community building.
Okay, as long as it says at least one, we're good.
Do you, Kathy, have an estimate of how many shelters actually will be there? We were discussing 60 people, 45 shelters.
Okay, right now,
How many-
our goal is to have between 20 and 25. We'd like to open with 20. Walla Walla has 31, and they're quite a bit bigger than us, but we also actually have more land than they have. Their 31 units sit on between a half and 2/3 of an acre, and we've got 8/10 of an acre. So, and we're developing plans right now to be able to have an open house once our first unit is built, so that, I don't know, open house isn't probably the word since there's no house, but be able to have people come in and we'll be there. They can ask questions. They can see one of the units. They can see what the site looks like. I'd encourage any of you that can go over to Walla Walla, take a look, because I was incredibly impressed with how neat and clean and tidy it was. That's probably what really got me excited about being able to do this, was seeing it in action and seeing what a great place it was. So yeah, other questions?
If I can go after the questions, I just had a couple of comments I want to make before we
I had one response to the 20 to 25 unit thing, and then our shower issue.
And the parking.
Oh yeah, the parking. But the shower issue, our parking standards now allow people to utilize off-street park or off-site parking within 500 feet. It would be easy to say with 20 units to do 2 showers and within 500 feet. That would be day one operation, and that'd be an easy change to make in the code.
One of the rules we've had at the warming station that we were planning on continuing is that vehicles are not allowed to stay on the property during the hours that the site is not open. So we were not planning on anyone leaving vehicles there. And not a whole lot of them have vehicles. We also don't allow any sleeping in the vehicles. They're not allowed to be on the grounds unless they are checked in as a guest.
Which might have to be a yes for the car. Byron.
So just one, I did speak to the deputy city manager in Walla Walla. He is the one that kind of oversees the project there, and he offered to arrange for a tour or whatever if you wanted to come up there kind of as a group even, or if individuals, I can get with him.
A rod bus tour?
Yeah.
Bus travel.
And then the second point I wanted to bring up, I should have brought up when we were talking about distances from schools. Probably the biggest concern I've heard, or one of the largest concerns, is how close it is to a park. And, how do we try to make sure that it doesn't impact community's use of the park if that's the location. So I just want to make sure the council had that.
So as a board, we discussed that issue, and I'm checking with an attorney to make sure we get the wording correct, but we want to have that as part of our agreement, is that if they,
Just don't walk around the hedge and go sleep in the
that
park.
if they are loitering, if they get cited for loitering in the area of the park, that would be a condition for being expelled from our unit. So,
I wanted to ask Jason.
because that's a legitimate concern. If you go over, there's 2 trees missing, but there's a great tree line just beyond the fence. So between the fence with the privacy slats and the trees, you can't even see the park.
Yeah.
Nor can the park see the site. So we need 2 trees planted in there.
Well, we're out of time this evening. I know it's going to come back again for the council to comment on and give feedback. Continue to speak to the community and listen and take some advice as far as what they would like to see happen. I appreciate what Quint's done so far as putting together some sort of policy change that we could effectively put something like this in our policy and in our community. And kudos to you again, Kathy, and your agency and your group for trying to
You have a
tackle.
full board now?
Yeah, I know. For trying to tackle this tremendous challenge, and I appreciate your hard work and effort in that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are going to end our work session conversation, and we'll start our regular meeting in 4 minutes, 7:05. How about that? Yes.
They can access.
2? That's enough then.
Yeah, really. Thank you. Grant money, yes. Everything's. Yeah, well, wild horse, they're not accepting any applications for July. And the bad part was, I met with the May 1st deadline, she was supposed to July 1st deadline. Well, the problem is, yeah. Great, I should have gone for May. Yeah, but you don't know. You don't know.
My daughter made it home and stuff.
I had emails, but I haven't seen the face. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I have this study group that we've been doing, and last week for the first time we met. I said, you guys look different. You have your whole body instead of your kids. Rod's wife Rod's partner's wife. No, thank you.
and say they change the ordinance committee.
Dental?
That's what I'm thinking, the same time.
Okay, so what's this one?
Really well.
Is that the one we were just working on?
No, that's the, up at the industrial park.
Okay.
We have to continue that.
Oh, that's right.
I don't know how the hell I would
I was gonna say, I'm getting that quarantine body already.
I've always read it, and you just want to read it. This horse is
I have Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night off.
Oh, okay.
I took tomorrow night.
May I have another?
So I only have 11 shifts left.
Yeah, I was like, I probably deserve it.
No, you deserve it.
I deserve it. I like honesty.
All right, we're going to call the Hermiston City Council regular meeting to order. Daniel, we're still online, so if you're watching us online, we had a work session this evening to discuss temporary emergency shelter zoning. We're now into our regular meeting, and if you are watching online and you would like to participate by the phone, we will have some opportunities to do some public comment, and during those, we will take public comment from the phone as well. Again, you can call in at 1-855-552-4463 and using meeting ID number 775-468-5399. And when the time is appropriate, I'll ask you to press *7 and you can make a public comment. Okay, so we have a declaration of a quorum, all members present. Is that accurate? Even though we have an absent member? Yeah, all members present. So
Because he's
it's a vacated seat. Yeah, okay, so all members present, well, 7. I guess count me as 8. Let's do the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have some very special guests this evening. The first most specialist guest we're going to get to is our new city council member. And I'd like to have David McCarthy come forward, please, up to the desk here. This is your one opportunity to kind of talk about yourself, brag about yourself, your lovely wife, whatever you want to talk about. Let the community know who you are, why you're doing this, and then Lily is going to administer the oath of office.
If you didn't catch the last city council meeting, I did mention that I'm the sales manager at KOHU and KQFM radio. My lovely wife Alexis, who's here tonight, is the studio director at Dance Unlimited, and we're both heavily involved in service organizations and with our church. I'm the president of Kiwanis, and she's also in leadership at Altrusa. I am on the vestry at St. John's Episcopal Church, which our priest is also on the board for Stepping Stones, as was talked about in the work session. And I am involved in lots of various community projects. I've emceed at lots of various town events, meetings, lots of festival street things, and helped to plan leadership Hermiston projects and various things around the area. And I'm particularly passionate about the future that I can help plan for my future kids and other families as well in Hermiston, making it a great place to live and raise a family. I'm also particularly passionate about the success of small business in the community.
Welcome. Your lovely bride is a Hermiston native.
That's
Grew up
correct.
here, graduated here.
Yeah.
Convinced you to come back here. You're from?
Actually, I was offered a job here, and then I told her, you know, if we stayed here, I wouldn't hate it. But the plan was to go to grad school, wherever that was. And then she fell in love with her job here. So
Good, good. Well, I'm glad she convinced you to come to Hermiston. Finding out what a great place it is and how sweet life is, right?
it is. And I was asked once what's so different about, I used to live in Spokane, what's the main difference? I used to say that it was a nice surprise if I bumped into someone in Spokane while I was at the grocery store. And here it's a surprise if I don't.
Right. Very true. All right. Lily, would you like to administer David's oath so he can join us at the council chambers, or council?
David, do you want to stand right here?
Dais?
That way
Yes.
your wife and family can see and I'll do this to follow along. Okay. So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, David McCarthy, do solemnly affirm
I, David McCarthy, do solemnly affirm
that I am duly qualified to hold the office
that I am duly qualified to hold the office
of City Councilor for the City of Hermiston,
of City Councilor for the City of Hermiston,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Oregon,
the Constitution of the State of Oregon,
and the Charter of the City of Hermiston,
and the Charter of the City of Hermiston,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully
the
discharge
duties of my office to the best of my ability.
the duties of my office to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Well, please take your seat with us up here at the council dais. Good to have you join us.
Fancy green plaque.
Yeah, it's brand new. It looks like it was printed on a printer that hadn't run out of ink.
Yeah.
Those are little.
All right, so if the council, one of the agenda changes I would like the council to consider this evening is we have some proclamations, presentations, and recognitions that have gone way down the agenda. And I would like to move those maybe up after the consent agenda to right below item number 9 before we go into public hearings. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the reasons we asked to do that, Dr. Mooney may not be here at that
Okay.
point, so
So-
we may need to delay that
Okay.
piece.
Let's move the others up,
That'd be great.
just out of respect for their time and travel, so that they don't have to hear all the minutia of our meeting if they don't want to. So we're going to do the first opportunity in our meeting for citizen input on non-agenda items. So if there are citizens here this evening that would like to speak to City Council, please come up to the front desk, introduce yourself by name and address, direct your comments to me, and try to limit your discussion to not more than 5 minutes. Welcome.
Good evening, my name is Jackie Linton, 111 West Beach Avenue, Hermiston. I just wanted to come up and say that the march on Saturday was awesome. It renewed my mind of how wonderful Hermiston is and how great the majority of the people are here in Hermiston. It went very well. Everybody showed up of every race, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it. But everybody was there and they supported it. It was very peaceful. We just had a couple of minor incidents. And a couple of young kids just yelled out, "Jesus loves you," and it kind of shocked me, for a second there, I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. But it was just wonderful, and I'm very excited and happy about how it went. And so I just wanted to come up and say that. Thank you.
Jackie, before you go.
Yes.
I think it's important, though, to recognize community leaders. And I'm sure you wouldn't recognize that title.
No, I don't.
But I think it's important to recognize the leadership of an organization or an event like that. And through your leadership, I think you've provided a appropriate foundation and a reflective representative of what a person should be and should act like. And the reason it was so successful is because of that. And, you know, it's a very tumultuous time in our nation right now. And it's leaders like you that help to calm the storm. And so I wanted to say thank you for your leadership and your peaceful protest. And hopefully you continue to stay engaged in that process.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Others? Okay, so there will be more opportunity for public input. Yes, ma'am? Oh, I did not. Are there people on the phone that would like to speak? *7. Okay, so we will move on. Thank you, Lily, for reminding me. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. There's items A through C. Would the council like to pull any of those? Okay, seeing none. Can I get a motion to approve consent agenda items A through C?
So moved.
Second.
Then moved by Councilor Davis, second by Councilor Harden, that we approve consent agenda items A through C as presented. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone? *7. Okay. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously, 8-0. That's not so tough, is it?
I said no.
Watch your way
Still would have been
around.
approved.
It's easier.
All right. The only question I had about the consent agenda was the Fo Quan, the new restaurant. So we approved their liquor license. Have we heard anything about opening date?
I noticed the roof got damaged.
Yeah, I see that. So kind of excited
I
for.
know this, I think the Herald did a little thing, you didn't quite get a hold of somebody or an owner, so I don't know.
Nice to have another source of cuisine within our community. So I'm looking forward for them. Okay, so I've asked the council to move 12. I think it was 12. Yeah, 12. The presentation by the League of Oregon City staff. And I'd like to welcome up Patty Mulvihill and Jamie Kaitner from League of Oregon Cities. Welcome.
Hi, can we sit?
Absolutely. Please join us.
For those of you who don't know me, I know a lot of you. I'm Patty Mulvihill. I'm the general counsel for the league, and I'm Jamie Havener. I'm her assistant general counsel. So we have just it's a little bit longer presentation than I thought because I stupidly asked if what I had planned to present was enough, and it wasn't.
And we get these dignitaries all the way out here from like Salem. We want to take advantage of them as much as possible.
Yes. All right, I'll just ask Byron next time. So Jamie and I are out here, so this isn't necessarily applicable to Hermiston, but about 2 years ago when Mayor Dressman was on the board of directors for the League of Oregon Cities, we instituted a pilot program here in Eastern Oregon where league attorneys, basically Jamie and ourselves, would provide free legal advice to cities in Eastern Oregon. It's limited to small cities, so unfortunately Hermiston doesn't particularly count. But we're out here kind of getting information from the cities that do participate and even the cities that don't, because the board, of which Byron is now a member, will have to start evaluating that program in December to determine whether or not they want to keep it. And since we were going to be in the area and we finished up at Stanfield, we thought we would make a brief presentation to your city council meeting tonight. I'm going to start. I haven't heard y'all mention it yet, but I was asked by our legislative director to speak about COVID. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I feel like everybody in the world is tired of hearing about it. But just briefly so that you know, for those of you that don't know, under the Federal CARES Act, the state of Oregon was allocated a certain amount of funds. And under the federal government's treasury guidance, 45% of those funds were expected to be dispersed to cities and counties. It would be safe to say that certain members in the state of Oregon are perhaps not happy with dispersing 45% of that allotment, and so we've been negotiating with them over several weeks to try and determine how we can actually get that. As of Friday, we seem to have a plan where we will get a disbursement, and it will go to cities, counties, some special districts, although special districts are just going to get a flat $20 million. and the school boards. For the most part, the counties are going to get about 60% because they dealt with the public health crisis, so they had more expenses, and the cities will end up with about 40% of the allocation. What's important to know about the CRF funds at this juncture is that they can only be used essentially for reimbursement of expenses that cities have already incurred. But the guidance on that is somewhat broad. So there were several cities, and I'm sorry, I don't know if Hermiston was one of them, that gave small business loans to try and maintain those businesses. Those are considered reimbursable expenses. If you had to pay overtime for anybody, if you had to buy personal protective gear, that type of stuff can be used for it. So we think that there's no wood, or I would knock that agreement should essentially be done and should hopefully be announced in the next week. The bigger issue that the League's lobbying team is working on, and they're working on it at both the state level and the federal level, is to try and seek money for just general revenue replacement. So what we've heard from cities across the state of Oregon, and this is being mirrored nationally, is that the biggest impact, quite frankly, from COVID-19 is not money we spent on fighting COVID-19 or responding to it, it's the revenue we lost as a result of it. So whether that was a decrease in state shared revenue, if we are expecting to see a property tax decrease, several cities, so for example, a significant number of the cities along the coast don't have property taxes. They rely solely on transient lodging taxes, which has been problematic. We've got several cities, even ones that I would argue have been incredibly fiscally conservative over the last years, who are furloughing, if not laying off employees, because they've taken anywhere between 30 to 60% hits to their operating funds. So what we are seeking at both the state and the federal level is revenue replacement, so that it won't have those strings attached to it. So it will be meant to kind of bolster up some of the operating budgets. I don't know that we're feeling terribly hopeful at the federal level, to be honest, with the latest jobs report being better than what they anticipated. It doesn't seem like the Senate is going to be particularly willing to utilize funds, but the League's lobbying team is working really hard to try and convince the state government that perhaps some revenue replacement will be appropriate and needed. I have absolutely no information on a special session. We've been asking for a special session of the legislature since this all hit. And we have gotten nowhere yet, although the legislative director, Jim McCauley, is being super optimistic and believes one will happen this summer, and we will see how that goes. What he has asked me to convey is for those of you that get our weekly bulletins on Friday to please pay attention to those, because if we feel like we've got a shot at revenue replacement, he may be calling on cities across the state to speak with your state representatives about supporting that type of legislation to see what we can get. And so that's kind of where we are in terms of right now, where the League has been focusing in terms of COVID is how can we help financially bolster some of the cities that are experiencing difficult financial income or results of the disease and the subsequent closures. So that's where we are with that. So that's kind of where we are. I know that you are a new counselor, and do you know anything about the League at all?
I have read the materials that are included in the new council binder.
Okay.
I found it useful.
Okay, good. Does anybody else I know some of you have been to trainings before because I've recognized you. So for those of you that are new or you haven't really paid attention, so the League is actually considered a subdepartment of the city of Hermiston. So all 241 cities in Oregon entered into a contractual agreement called a 190, and you created us as a subdepartment. So we're kind of like your police department, except we have way less responsibility than those guys back there. Thank you. And so we represent everybody. We kind of have three core strengths that we focus on. So obviously we have the lobbyists that I talked about already. They have been primarily, quite frankly, focused on COVID response the last 3 months, but generally speaking, they all have individual portfolios. Our legislative director focuses primarily on federal advocacy and transportation, as well as building code issues. We have another lobbyist who focuses on telecommunications and broadband. There's a third lobbyist who focuses on water, environmental, and public contracting. We have a fourth one who focuses on land use and housing, a fifth one who does tax and finance, and then Scott Winkles is kind of our potpourri lobbyist. He gets everything else. So whether that's public records to employment law issues, Scott does all of that. He kind of collects it all. In addition to lobbying at the state level and sometimes the federal level, they're also heavily involved with state agency directors and working on rulemaking authority. So they're fairly busy all the time. We have a member services division that focuses on, surprisingly, our engagement with members. They're responsible for our conferences. We had hoped to hold a conference here in this very building last April. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans and we had to cancel that. Hopefully we can reschedule that in the future. Right now, the league has 2 conferences a year. For those of you that don't know, we have an annual conference. Sadly, this year it will be virtual. So it's going to be a Monday through Thursday virtual event. We'll do about 3 hours online each day. The theory being nobody wants to sit at their computer for more than 3 hours to educate themselves. We're going to attempt to do some online networking things if you're interested in that. So we'll see how that goes. But normally they are a physical conference. If you haven't been, that sees about 1,000 people attending. Hermiston usually sends a pretty strong contingent, so this is probably no new information. And then we started a spring conference last year. Next year that will be in Seaside, so if you want a chance to go to the coast next spring, hopefully by then we'll be able to have actual large gatherings again. Member Services also does trainings, so they kind of run our training program. Jamie and I end up being the primary trainers. I think I've done several trainings in Hermiston and Jamie some trainings in Hamilton and stuff. So we're out here a lot, so we do that. And then I forgot, there's actually 4 divisions. So then we have communications. So if you get our electronic newsletter every Friday, our communications division runs that. We also have a local focus magazine. That's a print magazine, although we've been sending it out electronically because most city halls have been closed, so we've assumed that you probably don't want additional mail that you have to send somebody to pick up. But they run all of our communications on our website and our social media. And then you have us, the lawyers, who most people don't like until you actually need us. But I promise that we are actually very friendly and we try to be super helpful. And we kind of run a few main programs. Our main one that we do is we call it a member inquiry program. So anybody, whether it's city staff or an elected official, if you have a question or you don't understand something, you can just call us. That's what your dues pay for. And what Jamie and I like to say is while we won't give you legal advice, we get pretty darn close. So, if the city manager calls and says, we got a public records request and I feel like I shouldn't have to disclose this record, can you help me with the exemption? So we can pull the statute and highlight the exemption. If there's guidance in the public records manual from the Attorney General, we can highlight that and send it to you. So that's probably the bulk of what we do. We obviously do the pilot legal program where we're giving direct legal advice to those cities who participate in the program. We also started last year doing facilitation and mediation services for cities in crisis, which is not City of Hermiston. I think you guys all operate well together. Unfortunately, that is not true statewide. We have some that need some assistance in communication skills and team building exercises. So we work on that. And then we do provide general legal advice to all league employees and the board of directors. And that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And then if you have any questions about that, I can answer it. Am I allowed to take questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. I don't know the format. If anybody has any questions on what we're doing, or if you have feedback, if we're hitting the mark and you want to tell us great job, or if, in my typical world, if you have a complaint, I'm happy to take that as well.
I just wanted to comment on your legal support for Eastern Oregon. It was a program that we put in place when I was on board. I think it was a $10,000 allocation. Is that about right?
Well, we hired we have an honors attorney who's supposed to free up me and Jamie's ability to work on that. So a little bit more than 10,000.
Okay. So an allocation for legal support that was allowed to smaller cities that maybe didn't have resources to hire an attorney. And so they could then reach out to you and you could provide that legal service for them. It was a pilot project in Eastern Oregon, and I fought pretty hard to keep that pilot project. I think it was very well utilized, very well appreciated. And so I hope that continues to be a part of the mission of the board, because there's a lot of communities, especially during this time, that don't have the resources to keep things going, frankly, but let alone when they get confronted with legal issues, to be able to call a friend and hopefully get some help and support. So I applaud you and your team for providing that resource to our neighbors out here in Eastern Oregon.
It's been fun. I
enjoy it. Yeah, I get to do more stuff than I normally get to do in the office.
Yeah.
And you get to come out and see this beautiful country.
Yeah, it was a great day. I mean, and you get fun ones. I mean, I was an in-house city attorney for 14 years, and often as a league attorney, you get a lot of fun ones. But we were asked to write a nudity ordinance, which was kind of shocking. So yeah, it was the things that you get to do as a municipal attorney, because it's not outlawed.
What did you wear to do that?
Well, so it's not apparently public nudity is only prohibited in Oregon if you do it to arouse yourself or others. And there was a nudist who happened to move in right next to the one bus stop
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And so yeah, right? And so it was a super fun conversation with the city recorder, and she's like, "You've got to help me." And I'm like, "Sure, I can draft an ordinance. We can fix this." Yeah. So I'm like, that's why Jamie and I love working for cities, right? Because only in a city do you get to deal with public nudity. So that's that. When I reached out to Mayor Drossman and Byron, or last week, Mayor Drossman had some ideas for some stuff he'd like to brief us on. Specifically, he asked about some recent legislation that's impacting zoning and land use development, and as well as some recent cases that are impacting how cities interact with individuals who are lacking housing at the moment. So I'm going to deal mostly with the zoning. Jamie and I might tag team a little bit on some of the homelessness issues because she gave a presentation on this last year at a conference. So I would always, does everybody love land use in Oregon? Super excited. I used to consider myself a land use attorney and then I moved here. No. So I highlighted two, in my opinion, since 2017, there's been two major substantive changes that deal with land use at the local level in Oregon. The first one came about in the 2017 session, and it was known as Senate Bill 1051. You probably all know it as the Mandatory Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance. Anybody familiar with it? Love it. Super excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what's actually fascinating about this is when Senate Bill 1051 was passed, it was passed and it essentially says if you're a city and you have a population greater than 2,500, you have to allow what's known as an accessory dwelling unit on any lot with a single family dwelling unit. It went over really well across the state. All the cities super loved it. Maybe like 3 did. The theory coming out of the state house would be that this was a way to increase basically the housing stock, because we statewide have a housing shortage, so this would increase housing stock. It would also be an affordable way to provide housing. She's not with us anymore. Erin Doyle used to be the league's lobbyist. Now she's at Washington County, and she, passionately said, a one size fits all is not going to work. This may work in Portland. It's not going to necessarily work across the state. It also ignores certain things, like when you build single family homes, you put in like certain pipes just to fit it, and then when you slap on an ADU, it may not actually be able to handle the additional water load or sewer load. And we were just making that up. They didn't believe us. So the bill passed. And then the give to cities, in the sense, was they said that we could we could allow ADUs, but we could impose reasonable local regulations relating to siting and design. So we could essentially do siting and design standards that were reasonable. We didn't really have any guidance from this. And this actually became super important within the last 60 days, to be perfectly honest. So anybody follow anything with the city of Eugene ever? So the city of Eugene essentially gets sued every planning decision they make. I think I'm friends with their lawyers, and they're in Salem all the time at LUBA. And they had an accessory dwelling unit ordinance that they had, and they imposed what they thought were reasonable siting and design standards. And there was a property owner who strongly disagreed. And so the property at issue it had originally been a single family residence, and it had been converted into 4 apartments. So it was no longer really a single family residence. It looked like one, but it was 4 apartments. And he wanted to put on an ADU. And the city said no, because that doesn't meet our design standards. One, it's not accessible. It's not an accessory to a single family residence. You have this already as multifamily housing. This isn't going to work. 2, where they wanted to site it, the only access was going to be off an alley. And it's pretty common in development codes across to prohibit alley access only entries because you're worried about sight lines. It's harder usually to get fire trucks down there because we make alleys smaller. And they had some setback standards. This went up and down to LUBA multiple times. And the final decision came out, 60 days ago? 60 days ago, not long ago. And the decision, they ruled against the city. Essentially, LUBA said that what reasonable siting standards means is that it restricts the city to only identify a location on the lot where it can be located. That's it. All siting means is this is the spot on the lot where it can go. You can't have anything else related to siting. They specifically said that you can't prohibit ADUs because they would have alley access only. That you can't prohibit an ADU because of minimum lot size, and that you can't prohibit an ADU because of the dimensions of the lot, nor can you impose any type of occupancy restrictions, nor can you associate it with the actual use of the primary structure. So it doesn't matter that the code says it has to be single family, it has to be accessory to a single family. What they said was really what they meant was if you had what looked like a single family structure on the house, you had to allow an ADU. Like there didn't actually have to be a relationship between the two dwellings. So that didn't go over very well. When you have a LUBA decision, if a city, which is mostly who challenges it, appeals it under the statute, it's what's considered fast-tracked, and it goes immediately to the Court of Appeals. The league occasionally, I didn't mention this, occasionally we will participate as amicus in cases, and we did participate in that one. Because we think quite frankly LUBA got it wrong. I mean, their definition of siting may meet Webster's dictionary, but anybody who does land use planning knows siting means something way different than what you would find in Webster's dictionary. And their opinion upended everything we had been told when they were passing the legislature. And what makes it even more worse is if that LUBA decision stands, do you guys know what House Bill 2001 is from last session? Yeah. Maybe something about single-family zoning. Yeah, right? So the LUBA decision matters because it's going to impact House Bill 2001. And the reason I say that is, so for House Bill 2001, that's the one that essentially says, for Hermiston's purpose, you have to allow a duplex on any lot that's zoned residential use. This is actually a little bit better because if you were bigger, you'd have to allow not just duplexes, you'd have to allow triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. So it was a little bit of a win. I mean, not much, but it was a little bit of a win for cities under 25,000. The reason the LUBA decision is super concerning to us is because that statute, when it talks about you having to allow duplexes, it also says that you can use reasonable siting and design standards when you allow those duplexes. So if LUBA's decision is allowed to stand, then those same weird rules that they say can't happen for ADU are the same things that can't happen for duplexes. So it will upend zoning in a way that we don't think the legislature intended, even though we do think that the legislature was trying to do some interesting things. We expect a decision from the Court of Appeals on that very quickly, in the sense that because they have to have an expedited review, we would expect to get a decision hopefully very shortly. I've talked with the Eugene attorneys. If the Court of Appeals sides with LUBA, I think there's a strong chance that they will appeal to the Supreme Court and ask for cert review, and that we would probably participate as amicus again, just because of the long-range implications of what that interpretation will mean. Those are really the two biggest land use decisions that I think are impacting cities of your size in the last 2 years, to be perfectly honest. There's been some smaller tweaks here or there, but those are the ones where I think you're seeing substantial modification to how you do business and how you rethink zoning in general. And we're really hoping we can get the Court of Appeals. I will say I think the City of Eugene's brief was extremely strong. Our brief, I didn't write it so I could say it, was extremely strong. And I do think that it's on our side, but I make no predictions on what courts will do at this point. I could bet $100 to be wrong.
So essentially doubled our inventory. So trying to do a urban growth expansion pretty much became impossible to say.
I think it's going to be difficult, yeah. I think the state has always wanted infill, and they're going to argue that you have infill. I think what I find problematic is whether or not you think that you need this housing and it's appropriate for all types. I think it is an unrealistic interpretation of how we designed our cities to begin with. Like, you didn't design the traditional suburban neighborhood to allow for duplexes and ADUs. I mean, even simple things that I don't think the legislature took seriously, like when we designed streets, we assumed a traffic pattern of a certain amount. If you put an ADU on every single, or a duplex on every single lot, I guarantee you we didn't predict that much traffic on that street. And so, but they were really unwilling to listen to that. And so I think, unfortunately, what it's really going to do is there's going to be some long-term negative impacts on cities. And we're going to see some costs on the back end if these explodes in ways that the legislature just didn't. You're going to see more wear and tear on your streets. You're going to have issues with sanitary sewer, issues with water, even simple things. You know, you're going to have more garbage haulers on your roads. It's going to be problematic. I don't know if you guys are seeing requests here for that yet. If you're getting any requests for these types of things, or you're hearing rumblings that people are going to want to do it. I will say that even in the metro region where this was supposedly supposed to be a huge push, they haven't seen an actual push from it yet for developers. Like, it still wasn't really what they wanted to perhaps do. But I think it's going to have some long-term interesting implications for some cities, which is why we're really hoping we can get some better clarification on what those definitions mean. I will tell you that when they passed House Bill 2001 this session, they told DLCD they needed to establish rules to kind of try and expand like what reasonable siting and design means. And we've had some serious conversations with DLCD about LUBA's interpretation and have made it clear that we think that went way outside the scope of what was intended, what was negotiated, and certainly outside the bounds of any normal land use discussion. And while I don't think like DLCD is like 100% on board with us, it's my understanding that they recognize LUBA probably went further than they should have. So even if we can't get something out of the Court of Appeals, our lobbyist who works with DLCD does seem to think they can tighten up some stuff, at least in the administrative rules, that might inherently undo that decision. So we might see some relief, theoretically.
Sure. No, I mean, just kind of to go with what you're saying, it's just so concerning. I mean, we're tearing up streets, we're making investment in infrastructure, and if you look at the character of some neighborhoods, they're designed to be single-family homes, but when you start putting duplexes and other things like that, the infrastructure, even underneath the roads, certain pipes are only supposed to carry so much waste or so much water. And when we start putting in, doubling occupancy and things like that, it just is something that it wasn't designed to do. So this is really unfortunate.
There's a bunch of money that came along with this too, right? To help cities.
Yeah, they always get us
Right.
They love us. So I may be Pollyanna, and our lobbyist would probably tell me to be quiet, but but so what? Whatever.
Are not here.
Yeah, if you're not here, he can't yell at me, and you all won't tell. So I personally have always thought that where we as cities or local governments kind of fail is we get a bad statute passed, and then we just live with it, and we just suck it up as another preemption that we have to deal with. And in my opinion, House Bill 2001 in particular was considered really egregious by cities across the state. In my opinion, it wasn't the quintessential urban-rural divide issue. It wasn't east versus west. It was across the board. Like even the city of Portland, who was considering doing this in certain zoning districts, was opposed to the legislation, saying you can't tell us how to design our cities. And what will work in, like on the east side of Portland may not work in Hermiston, so don't tell Hermiston you have to. This would be one of those opportunities where I would suggest that cities should collectively say, I'm not going to live with this. Like, I may have to do this today, but I'm going to expend resources and time and maybe fighting it. At some point, again, the lobbies probably would kill me for saying this, but at some point, there should be some times where we just say, enough is enough, it passed. We'll follow the rules, but we're going to spend a concerted effort to try and make it go away because it just isn't going to work for us. And this, I think, is one of the first issues I've seen that holistically across the state was not well received. And was strongly objected to by cities of all sizes.
So the appropriate recourse, once legislation goes into place like that, is to take it to court or to put legislation back in place to cancel out that legislation?
Put new legislation in. I mean, I think they're well within their right to pass this type of legislation. I think spending money on a court case would just be throwing money at lawyers. I can say that because we get paid whether you work 80 hours a week or 20. It's never been 20 ever. But I would say that I think this is one of those times where maybe a push, you're going to get your ballots from the league in the next week probably for what your priorities are for, the next 2 legislative sessions. If this is something that you're still concerned about, I don't know if it's an option because I haven't looked at the ballot, but I think that's a time to have your voice heard and say, look, I don't want to just live with it. Like, this really bothers me and it's going to have significant impacts and we need to do something about it. I think we tend across the board, and I'm not saying the lobbyists, I'm saying everybody across the board, we tend to just, we trumped it again, we'll live with it, we'll modify our behavior, and we don't ever actually take a step back and say, legislation's not perfect. I mean, I'm sure here at some point you've had ordinances that you've amended or that you've even repealed, and I think holistically there's not a reason why we can't assume that can be happen at the state level. If they can pass a law saying we have to do X, they can pass a law saying we no longer have to do X, theoretically. So that's what we have for land use. Are there any other questions on that one? Yeah? Okay. So for those people back there who don't know anything about land use, I'm sure you're super excited to learn about it. The last thing that we want to talk about, another big development, quite frankly, in municipal matters is cities and how they interact with individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Has anybody heard about the Boise decision? That's generally how people call it. So the city of Boise, and this started back several years ago, like the Boise case started about 5 years ago. It was a long time getting to a final decision. But essentially, Boise had what they called an anti-camping ordinance. And they prohibited what they called camping on their streets, their sidewalks, their parks, or any public place. But they defined camping to be really, really broad. Essentially, it was the temporary or permanent use of basically public property for sweeping purposes. You couldn't sit, you couldn't sleep, you couldn't lie. Like it was considered camping. And a group of individuals who were homeless sued the city and essentially said, look, in doing this, you are violating my constitutional rights under the U.S. Constitution, specifically the 8th Amendment. And they were doing that off a previous U.S. Supreme Court decision that essentially said, it related more to individuals who were addicted to certain substances, that you can't criminalize people for like the state of being. So you can criminalize behavior, but you can't criminalize something that somebody can't control. And so in the Boise case, what they were essentially alleging was, I have nowhere else to go. And the physical, like the body physically has to sleep. And so if I have no home and I have nowhere to go, you can't criminalize the fact that I have to sleep. Like that is a bodily function that I have to do, and I have nowhere else to go, so I have to do it on a city sidewalk or in a city park. And so as the litigation was going through the lower courts, the city of Boise essentially issued an administrative order saying, look, we're not going to enforce this ordinance unless so what they said is we won't enforce it as long as there are no available beds in any of our shelters. So if there's an available bed in a shelter, we're going to cite you. And the litigation didn't go away because what the individual said is, look, you can't just say there's an available bed because I may not be able to use that bed. So that available bed could require me to be sober. That available bed could have had a time limitation, so I was only allowed to use that shelter for 45 days. It's the 46th day. That's really not an available bed to me. Or that's not an available bed because in order to utilize that bed, I have to go to classes that focus on the Jewish faith, and I'm not Jewish, and so making me go there is essentially making me practice a particular type of religion, and you can't do that. So it works its way up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think from my perspective, this is important to note, is the Ninth Circuit's decision was not what we call a majority opinion. So it's what passes, but it wasn't like a unanimous decision by the Ninth Circuit. And what they essentially did was they agreed with the petitioners, with the individuals who are experiencing homelessness, saying, look, they have nowhere else to go, so you can't criminalize them, essentially punish them, issue them a citation or arrest them or issue them a fine when they have no other option. Like they must sleep. Therefore, they must sleep on some type of public space. What I think is misunderstood about this opinion, and Jamie, you jump in if I'm getting any of this wrong, is that most cities, and I think this is because it's a confusing opinion, read it to mean there's absolutely nothing they can do. Like it's just a free-for-all. Anybody can sleep on their sidewalk, in their park, on their city hall steps, and that's not really what the opinion says. It says a couple key things that I think get missed. First, you're not required to provide homeless shelters yourself. I mean, there's a whole policy call. I know you were talking obviously tonight about some temporary housing, and I think Mayor Drossman's point about you should try and help your citizens and your community members get up out of homelessness and find a different way, I think is a good thing. But legally, you're not required to provide those beds. You're not required under this opinion to allow individuals to sit, lie, or sleep on city streets at any time or at any place of their choosing. So it's not a free-for-all, right? You can impose what we like to call in the legal world some reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. You just can't prohibit it citywide. It doesn't apply to people who have access to adequate shelter but choose not to use it. Now, from my perspective, that's a pretty unenforceable provision, particularly in your bigger cities. I mean, you're not going to have a law enforcement officer being like, okay, so if you take a big city like Portland, who probably has 20 shelters, they're not going to call all 20 shelters to identify what religion is it, was this person here before, is it a barrier? Like, it's not going to happen, so it's essentially, in my opinion, a meaningless provision from the court. The court says they do believe it may be possible to adopt an ordinance that prohibits sitting, lying, and sleeping during particular times of the day or at particular locations. What's super interesting for me there is they use the word may, not that we can, which typically means try it. You're probably going to be sued, and then we'll figure it out that time. Super helpful. Love it when they do that. They did note that it's probably possible for you to prohibit like obstructing rights of way, and so then prohibiting like the establishment or erection of like a tent or a temporary shed. Practically speaking, what a lot of municipal attorneys have said is essentially what this has done in bigger cities. It's going to require cities to kind of pick and choose where you're going to allow it. So, for example, have any of you ever been to the city of Salem? So they have a huge riverfront park, and they've like built pedestrian bridges to connect it to other parks, and it's kind of like the quintessential park. Theoretically, the city could say, look, you can't sleep, lie, or sit in those parks. You can sleep, lie, and sit on this vacant lot that we have over here out of the way, because we acknowledge that we can't criminalize you for this behavior, and you may have no option but to sleep outside. But if you're going to sleep outside, this is the area of the city where you can, in fact, sleep outside. What was interesting is the city of Boise petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to try and get them to review it. And it's really, really rare to get the U.S. Supreme Court to take up a case. And the league actually filed an amicus brief. We were specifically asked to by the city of Boise because Oregon is a unique state and that most of our cities are smaller. And what we had was a significant number of data to show that when the Boise decision came out, it wasn't negatively impacting Portland or Eugene or Salem or Medford. It was really, quite frankly, the biggest negative impact was on our coastal cities because there was no regulation of any kind. And the cities were essentially saying, look, I know that you are telling me that I can probably restrict in these certain areas, but if I get sued, I don't have any money to defend it, so they can just pop tents up on the sidewalk or the parks or wherever. And so we had a bunch of data and statistics that showed that crimes against homeless persons had skyrocketed. Like the city of Warrenton saw like a 450% increase in crimes against homeless persons, not them committing it, like people were harming them more. We saw like massive amounts of overtime that had to be used by police services and public health agencies. So we had some data to suggest that, look, this decision wasn't really well reached. Like cities in Oregon care about responding to and helping individuals with homelessness, and we're committed. We recognize this as a problem, but we all have unique ways of solving it, and we've been working on it and investing money and funds into this, and now you've just upended all of it, and you're creating this problem. We actually really thought the Supreme Court was going to take it because usually they just deny cert. They'll tell you like on this day we're going to release our decision, and they delayed the decision twice. Which, like, I don't practice at the Supreme Court and I never will, but the people who do told me that what that meant was that there wasn't consent and they couldn't quite figure out a majority from the justices. And ultimately, they denied review. But some of the experts who focused on the court have indicated that the reason they think it was denied is because they're waiting for what we call a split circuit decision. So essentially, we've got the Ninth Circuit saying this, and they're waiting for a different circuit court to say the exact opposite. Most legal experts expect that decision to come either from the Fifth or the Seventh Circuit, and we assume it will happen in the next 12 to 18 months. And once that happens, once there's a conflicting opinion, then we expect the Supreme Court to weigh in. In the interim, we have an active case going because of the city of Grants Pass. So the city of Grants Pass had a similar ordinance to Boise, not quite the same. And about 9 months ago, they had a class action lawsuit filed against them, saying that in light of the Boise decision, their ordinance is now unconstitutional and they have to upend it. That just finished summary judgment at the federal district court in Oregon last week, with oral arguments being held. I wasn't there, but my understanding from the lawyers who are is that the judges were playing pretty coy. We don't have any sense of how they're going to rule. What's interesting about Grants Pass case is it has some subtle factual nuances that differ from Boise. So the city of Grants Pass has actually gotten a lot of outside legal expert help from people. So for those of you that don't know, it's not really easy to practice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. There's 200 attorneys, and something like 90% of all cases argued before the Supreme Court are argued by the same 20 to 25 attorneys. Those attorneys are actually, their firms are funneling money to Grants Pass's attorneys because they see the Grants Pass case, quite frankly, as the best chance to get the Ninth Circuit to revisit the issue, and they think the timing will be such that by the time it goes back to the Ninth Circuit, the Fifth Circuit or the Seventh Circuit will have issued a contradictory ruling, and they can then use the Ninth Circuit's denial to get them back up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Right? I know, right? Like the lawyers are getting super rich off this right now. But that's kind of where we are with that. Did I miss anything? No. Okay. So that's kind of where we are with that. And I hate to say it's fascinating because it's a super interesting case. And these are people's lives at stake and these are cities at stake. But it's been one of the more interesting, nuanced municipal law cases that have come out in probably the last 5 years. Because it has wide-ranging implications, and at least I can't speak for every state, but I do think cities in Oregon are actually really working very hard and coming up with unique ways to try and help their citizens who are experiencing homelessness, and I do think parts of this order have created a roadblock for that.
So Jamie, you just sat there patiently
I know.
waiting, and she sucked all the air out of the room. You
Makes me talk a lot the other
You're
night.
used to it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you breathe.
So.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I talk really fast.
That's why she didn't bother
But
either.
Patty definitely.
Yeah.
So nothing to add, Jamie, nothing to add?
No, she covered everything.
Okay. So.
Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the updates, specifically because I requested those, so I appreciate you answering the questions. The one thing you had mentioned earlier that I wanted to make sure that the council accurately understood is there was some, going back to the CARES Act and the CRF funds, the coronavirus relief funds, there was some allocation to the cities or local municipalities up to 200 million, of which the first part of that was designed for healthcare related responses to COVID. We've talked about this before. There was a lot of pushback at not the last emergency board meeting, but the board meeting before that about the city's dissatisfaction. We wrote a letter, I think, in response to what was seen as the outcome of that. And so a lot of legislators, those people that participated in contacting the legislators, there was a lot of pushback with it. And I think it was heard by leadership that there needed to be a more inclusive process. So there was a process that LOC participated in, including AOC and special districts, as well as a bicameral, bipartisan committee. And they have come up with some funding mechanisms, which I think you were going to, or you were alluding to, of the other 150 million-ish that was allocated out of the 200 million, which is way short of 45%, but it looks like that's all we're going to do. And so trying to put together some sort of compromise plan that was supported by all the entities involved, I think at least was leadership's potential compromise to solve our frustrations with that. And so it is currently in the governor's office for a decision. And so LOC has sent out a call to action for all of you to reach out to Speaker Kotek, President Courtney, and the governor and say we support this recommendation by the committee. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more, I mean, I don't know how much y'all have spended, but I think that it's good to say that we, one, we deserve our fair share reimbursement, and even if you didn't need it, like other cities do. And so it's appropriate. Everybody played a role in responding to this pandemic, and the money should be distributed appropriately so that it's being, we all had to deal with it, and so it should be shared equally. So I think a call to action is fair. I have the sense from Jim that the deal will probably, it's going to be accepted. That's the sense I'm getting. That he seems overly hopeful in a way he has not in the last 3 months about everything else. He seemed hopeful when we first started this with a special session. He's not seemed hopeful lately. So he does seem hopeful about this. So I think it's here. I do think it's important to say that I do think, I'm not going to include special districts. I think they came to the table late, but particularly the Association of Oregon Counties. I think it was a real partnership between us throughout this entire process. And I know a lot of times cities and counties are at odds with each other. And there was obviously some bickering over who gets the greater percentage of this, but ultimately we hashed those out and we really kind of came at this as a united front, which I do think speaks well of the organizations and quite frankly of cities and counties together, because I know we're frequently at odds with them. But in this instance, we were kind of unified.
And I've shared this with your leadership, that I think maybe one of the greatest outcomes of this pandemic for LOC and AOC is a renewed partnership and focus on trying to find ways to work on policies together. Because it's really obvious that we don't matter sometimes at the state level. And so if we can't be unified in our voice and we're independent, we're not going to be heard as well. But that was evident that we were able to do that this last time. And so I agree with you. I think that partnership is much stronger and we need to work better together as local municipalities. So I'd encourage them to continue to water that garden, because I think eventually it's going to bear some fruit for us, hopefully.
I think staff has always worked well and collaborated together, but this is, I don't want to say it's the first time, but it was a big public push from the beginning. Like, we are a team. Don't try and separate and divide us. We are working on this together. And I think, to your point, I think it worked well in the end, which is also why I think it's more likely the governor will accept it, because everybody at the local government level is walking and saying, this is what we support, this is what we want, we're in agreement, we're not fighting, this is what needs to pass.
Do you have an opinion about the Baker decision and the governor's
Whether or not her emergency thing. So
where's the status of that?
So the status of that is, I think the Baker, I don't think that the executive order they're upset with, I think that's within her limits. I will be honest, the executive order she enacted to give cities relief, like with local budget law and public meeting law, I think we both agree that's way outside her authority. I think it was a nice little give, but I don't know of most municipal attorneys I've talked to have said, no, we still have to meet the budget deadlines, or in statute, she can't supersede statute. So I think Baker County, I don't read that she acted outside her scope in that. And I don't read the decisions. I mean, I think the appellate court has been making it pretty clear that they are going to uphold the governor's orders. Like,
when is that decision going to come?
I think they gave him an opportunity
for more information.
For more information, or not. I think they'll act quickly.
Him, the judge?
The judge, yeah.
And I don't think he had any intention of providing more information. He's not.
Yeah. So you'll get, I think if I remember correctly, procedurally, then where they are is in an expedited briefing schedule. So because he wouldn't clarify his order and or rescind it, which is what he was told to do, it put them into an automatic briefing cycle where both parties had a very short amount of time to file the briefs on their legal positions, and I would expect the court to issue a ruling pretty quickly. I don't think this is one they're going to sit on. And I say that saying that I often find the appellate courts to take an exceptionally long time to issue opinions in this state.
It would surprise me, frankly, if they came out with fast decision.
I think they'll get one. I think states will be reopened, and I think the issue will be moot. For me, fast is like in 60 or 90 days. That's still fast from a lawyer.
Not by July.
Not by
July 1.
No.
When I think the executive order is over, right?
No, I don't. I would love. So I will be a little Pollyanna. I'm not saying that judges don't play politics, because they probably do, but I'm going to be naive enough to assume that maybe they will stay above the political fray and just issue the ruling. Because I think what they did already by saying you either need to clarify your findings or rescind, I think that sends a message as to where they're going. So to not issue the ruling now, it seems kind of like most lawyers would say they've already issued an opinion, they just haven't issued an opinion.
Fair enough.
That's what I think. But yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll issue, I could be. I don't know.
Never.
I don't know I'm wrong.
Any other questions or comments from the council?
Yeah, I like the names of the cities and the cost did not pay property taxes, and they moved there.
If I could just put a plug, I don't know how many of you I would actually be interested in attending our virtual annual seminar, but I would encourage you to at least sign up and give it a shot. And even if you have no interest in attending the seminar, it's super important for me and Jamie that we have a city representative to be there for the annual membership meeting so you can vote for your new board members. So I don't care who you designate. If you're completely bored, please just make sure you designate somebody who can attend and vote.
I think you got a board member there on.
Well, but he's not required to go. I'm just saying, that's what I'm worried about, is that because it's at the last day, everybody will be like, no, and don't sign up. And I've got I have 14 board members who've shown up for the annual business meeting, and I have a problem in terms of getting it done. So, but please try and at least sign up and attend a few days. I do think there will be some interesting sessions.
What are the dates?
October 13th is the date.
Yeah,
so it'll push back, right?
Yeah, it'll run Monday through Thursday. Yeah, and so the way it's structured is it'll be like a morning session one day, an afternoon, so it'll be like three hours of programming in the morning, and then the next day 3 hours of programming in the afternoon, and they're just going to do 3 hours. And there'll be 4 sessions to choose from at any given hour.
Date specific?
October
13th through 16th.
Through 16th, yeah. So
Good
just,
board
yeah,
member,
yeah,
right?
I mean, even if you don't stay the whole time, it would, mostly because we'd like to get feedback with COVID, we've had to do a few more virtual trainings than we normally would. I've done 3 so far, I find them less than exciting, but I think there's gonna be a push to do that for a while, and so it would be good to get feedback across the board as to, I mean, if you're not going to attend, we'll stop doing them, so it would be useful.
Registration currently open for that.
July 15th, I believe, right, or June 15th? We'll announce it in the Friday folder.
The dates are a little iffy.
Yeah.
Because we've had a kind of redo.
Yeah. Just tell Byron to go. Yeah.
Well, Rod always votes for us, always.
Do you really?
Rob the ballot,
He does.
yeah.
Okay, well then I need you to show up on Thursday. I'm like super paranoid that there will not be any city square and we're gonna run into a problem of which I won't know how to fix. So please show up.
Lawyers always.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see you guys. Thank you for stopping by our meeting this evening. Thank you for your work for all the cities, and especially those of us out here in Eastern Oregon and driving all the way out here to visit.
Yeah, it was fun. It was Jamie was super excited to get out of
Yeah. Being stuck at home with 2 little kids is challenging at times.
So thank y'all. We'll let you get to the rest of your
Good night.
business.
Thank you, guys. All right, I see our next special guest is here as well. Come on up. Hermiston School District Superintendent, Dr. Tricia Mooney. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Good evening.
Your athletic director filled in admirably the last time for you, so.
There you go.
Congratulations too on your, your daughter's graduation, but also accomplishing a graduation ceremony for our community. So thank you for that.
Well, good evening, and thank you for acknowledging that. I will say that for what it was great. We had a team of administrators and teachers at the high school and our custodial maintenance staff that put in, I don't know how many hours to pull that off. It was amazing. A lot of walk through, pretend like you're this person, pretend like you're that person, go do that again, so we could figure out how all of that worked. We did have, and I will say I see Chief Edmiston back there. We kicked off with our honor walk that we called it, and now that it's over and done, everyone's calling it a parade, but initially we weren't saying parade. But, I will say that one of the really amazing things about living in a community like Hermiston is that when you're trying to, in unique times, do something that is really good for kids and good for the community, there is support from community leadership, and I can't thank Chief Edmiston and HPD enough for their support of that event. I will say that it was quick. From where the kids started to when they were all down the road, it was maybe 25 minutes. It was amazing to stand at the entrance to the high school and look down Highland towards 7th Street and just see a sea of purple kids in caps and gowns. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that event, and everyone says that needs to stay. I have, again, a senior that graduated who was kind of like, do I have to go do that? It's going to be so hot. And then afterwards she was like, that was awesome. You have to do that every year. That was awesome. So I think it's neat in times that are challenging that we have a community that can pull together and do something really neat for our kids and our community. I think the fireworks, thank you to the city for allowing us to move that off of school grounds. Our initial concern was that we would have everyone want to congregate in the stadium, and we didn't really want to set up a situation that might in any way hinder our graduation plans for that actual ceremony. So, and I think moving it to the Butte allowed really everyone in town to be able to enjoy the fireworks. So kind of a highlight. There was a lot of positive feedback around fireworks, and so that was really neat.
And we got the pre-burn out of the way too, I think.
Exactly. There we go.
We don't have to do
Win-win.
pre-burn this year.
So yes, amazing. Definitely, we had 342 students walk across the stage on Thursday night for graduation in a lengthy ceremony, but it was great for kids. So
is that your largest number?
No.
No.
This graduating class is the smallest class we have in the district. So I guess at a time when you have to be really creative, it was good to have a smaller number to work with. We are, speaking of that, currently we have kindergarten registration open for 2021 school year. That has been, as you can anticipate, a little slower this year with our kids not in school, but we will open up registration for all students in July. And then as we get closer to the start of school, we're hoping to have parents register by August 7th so that we can plan things like bus routes and classes and how all of those things are going to look. Got an email today. We anticipate that on Wednesday there should be guidance around the start of the 2021 school year from the Oregon Department of Education. They have let us know, have let superintendents know that that guidance will be updated regularly every 2 weeks throughout the summer. So our back to school plan will be evolving. Right now there are 3 basic frameworks for schools to work under to bring kids back. One is to have all kids in school. One is to have a hybrid, so kids in school and online, and one is to have 100% of your students online. To go the fully online route will, I anticipate, require some approval from the Oregon Department of Education. So that tells me that we're all moving in the direction that we need our kids back in schools, and that's exciting to me. Our calendar, as we have adopted, as the board adopted it, has kids in class on August 24th, so that's my date. That's the date I'm working for. I do believe that we have teachers, parents, community members, kids that have stepped up in this time, but our kids need to be back in school. We have had an overwhelming amount of feedback from our high school kids about their dissatisfaction, if you will, for the total online platform. They miss the interaction with their peers, but one of the things that our kids did say in that they appreciated was the fact that they had teachers reaching out to them. So I think across the board, our kids miss our teachers miss our kids. I've said since we started, but since we stopped regular school, since we shut down, that we're in a people business with a whole bunch of people that can't people right now. And it's been stressful across the board, but it's nice to be able to be looking in a direction of having kids back. That'll be exciting. We do have summer program going on at the high school under the ODE guidance for summer program. So we have some students in that are doing strength and conditioning. We had overwhelming response from our kids, I think, which again is a testimony to the fact that our kids are ready to be back in school and have a place to be. So I will say, the first day that we had kids at strength and conditioning, I have a daughter who's a sophomore, going to be a junior, whatever she is right now. Dropped her off for strength and conditioning. I got a little teary-eyed, like, oh, we have kids. Like, there are cars in the parking lot and there are kids here. So I don't know what that says about me. Maybe as a parent, I didn't cry at graduation at all. I'm not a senior graduating, but I got teary when I saw our kids back in buildings. It's time to have them back. So we are on Monday, which will be the 15th, transitioning to our summer meal plan, if you will, for the school district. So the sites for Monday where you could go for lunch, where kids can go to lunch, again, it'll still be 0 to 18, will be the high school, Armand Larvey, Sandstone, and West Park. So we're switching those up a little bit, and we will still do our bus routes under the understanding that we're probably going to have to modify those a little with the change in sites. I know that we're working with the city for the program at Rocky Heights, and Champions is at Desert View. So there may be some adjustments to the bus routes, but we will continue the bus routes for both breakfast and lunch throughout the summer. I think I guess the big news are, we did put out a survey for the naming of the new elementary school. We either call it the new elementary school or the Theodore Lane Elementary School, so I'm ready for it to have a name all its own. We had over 200 responses on the initial survey, and 61% of those respondents preferred that the school be named after a local geographical or environmental feature, so like Rocky Heights. That, when we took out the names that didn't fit that category, we came up with 60 unique submissions. At this point, the board members are reviewing those submissions to narrow them down. We'll put out another survey. So before long, our future elementary school will have a name, which will be very exciting to be able to actually call it something as we move forward. So you can look for that future survey to give your feedback when we get those submissions narrowed down a little bit. Questions
How
for?
about a construction timeline?
We are still in design, still planning at this point. The high school softball fields are the first project, planning on going to bid end of summer, September-ish. Still, we're tracking right on that same timeline. As a matter of fact, today, Katie and I had a conversation about when we're going to need to apply for our new institution ID so that our school gets to be a school, our new school gets to be a school. But looking still right at, for the elementary buildings, 22-23 school year will have
We'll
those.
start construction or you'll be open?
We're going to be open.
Okay.
That's the plan.
So softball fields first.
Softball fields first. We have to move the softball field so that construction can start at Rocky Heights because it's going to be built on the current softball fields. So that project will start first, you know, the construction piece. But right now they're still in design, wrapping up this week with the groups, working with the music teachers for what needs to be in a music room, and the PE teachers for what does the gym need to look like, and classroom teachers, you know, what things do you want to see in a classroom. So those pieces that go into the design phase of the elementary, when we get through that design phase for the elementary building, we will start design on the high school annex. We've pushed that project from the beginning to the end so that we can really have a handle on the two big projects and then be able to focus on that annex.
So when would the actual physical work go on for, say, Rocky or the new school?
We will start work in 21.
Okay. Sometime next year, summer-ish.
Or spring.
Spring-ish. Softball will be played at the new site next year.
Yes. And I'm believing there's going to be softball.
I hope so. I already told Larry last week that I don't really want to watch football in the spring. So I'm kind of hoping that we have contact sports in the fall too.
There are a lot of scenarios that are being thrown around right now as far as what athletics can look like in the fall. And, you know, I've said over and over through this that our kids, we have amazing kids that show up to school, but they don't show up to learn necessarily. That's a byproduct of everything that's happening there. They show up because that's where their friends are. They want to be involved in a club or a sport or a band or choir. They connect with an adult, and that keeps our kids there. But we definitely need to have our kids back, and part of having our kids back is all of those activities and extracurricular things that keep their interest. So I'm choosing to be positive and move in the direction that somehow, some way, we're going to have kids in buildings, and we're going to have kids participating in athletics and activities and band and choir and all of those great things.
Right, so you get hand up.
Yeah, can I ask a quick question? Are like tennis courts and tracks, are they now open once more? Is it open?
They're not locked. The governor's executive order says that we can't have anyone from the public in our facilities, but they aren't locked. And I'm here right now, so I don't know who's there.
Another thing I know we've been talking about, like you said, the elementary school kind of already having a little bit of guidance with the name. I know you took a lot of online type surveys, but I had a lot of members in the community kind of express interest of having the school maybe culturally named, maybe after either Latino or maybe a figure here in the city that was well known back then or something like that. I just also pass that information along to you. We already kind of know the demographics of the school. I just also thought this would be a really good opportunity to kind of reflect the diversity of the district and the school as well. I thought I'd pass along that information as well.
My understanding is the community college now has said that their fall term is going to be online based. So does that, no, but you haven't made it, you're not able to make a decision on, oh, that's going to be a different area than the Department of Education.
Yes, so the Oregon Department of Education oversees K-12, and then there's an early learning department. And while we work on coordination with the higher ed, we have different sets of guidance that go toward how we're going to meet the needs of students in the fall. Clearly, and my personal opinion is that it's not safe for our elementary kids to be home. I think we have a lot of students who, parents have to work. The reality is that at some point, we need people at work. We need parents to be able to work, and no matter what your opinion is about it, we have families that rely on the school system for a safe place for our kids to be during the day, for them to get fed. The Department of Ed put out a number, I believe, that said, or maybe it was OHA, I'm not sure who, that said child abuse reports are down 60% per day during the school closure. And I don't believe that means that child abuse is down 60% per day. I think if anything, during this time when people are in their homes, and whatever vice you have, you're probably turning to that vice a little bit more. And there's a lot of stress that is happening in our homes. And so the safest place for our kids to be is in school. And our college kids can, have a little bit more freedom to navigate themselves, if you will, and be able to interact online and manage their time. But I will stand firm that I think the best place for our kids to be, our K-12 kids to be, is in school, and our elementary kids have got to be there every day. That's how we know they're getting fed. They're with an adult. Someone's watching them. So we're going to move in the direction any way possible. We're going to have kids in our buildings on August 24th.
Yeah, I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but I think this was actually planned by the teachers to prove to parents how important teaching is,
how valuable
and how
they
valuable they are, and how much they're underpaid and appreciated. But all seriousness, I completely agree with you. It would be a catastrophe if our kids were not in school this fall. I fully support kids going back to school, kids being taught by an adult. Their role model, their surrogate, that's what schools have become. And whether you like it or not, that may be the greatest leadership and mentorship that child's ever going to have. And we've lost 3 months of that, and we can't lose any more time with that. And so whatever you need me to do, I'll stamp Mayor Dave Grossman or Hermiston on any sort of letter you want to send.
Keep that in mind.
And we need kids in school this fall.
We need our kids.
Absolutely.
Our parents need that. And I have older children, but it drives me nuts to have my kids home all day. But our parents need to be able to return, and there's a stress to go to work and know your kids are at home. For our parents who are having to leave their kids at home. So, all the way around, the best thing for our kids, for our families, for our community is for our kids to be back in school.
Absolutely. Good. I will push for it and advocate for it too. Tell me where to sign it.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for coming. It's always
Thank
a pleasure to see you. And hopefully, we continue to work towards a common goal of getting our communities open and our kids back in school. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so I changed our agenda up a little bit, so we moved 12 around. We will go back now to public hearings, and we're going to move on to public hearings for the South Hermiston LID number 322, continue from March 23rd, 2020. At the August 12th, 2019 City Council meeting, this hearing was opened and continued to October 28th, 2019. At the October meeting, the hearing was then again continued to January 13th, 2020. At the January meeting, the hearing was again continued to March 23rd, 2020. At the March meeting, the hearing was continued to June 8th, 2020. So, what's the update? Who's giving it?
So the Economic Development Administration is continuing to review our application. We've submitted some answers to their questions, some additional information that they requested. And so we are requesting that we continue this hearing until August 24th.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. I think I heard a second
Continue to
floor.
continue.
So a motion by Councilor Kremer that we continue South Hermiston LID number 332 to 7 p.m. on August 24, 2020 at Hermiston City Hall or other location to be announced, seconded by Ms. Davis. Any questions? No? Public comment. Anyone? Anybody on the phone like to comment? Star 7. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, so that'll make it a year. Hopefully at some point we get some resolution with that.
Yes, hopefully.
All right, so 2020-2021 fiscal budget resolution. Can't read. Lily must have printed this on the same printer she printed my name tag, but it's resolution something.
2154, 2155, 2156, 2157.
2154, 2155, 2156, 2157. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest for the council?
These should be handled separately.
Okay. Jackie, do you have any declarations?
No.
Conflict of interest? Conflict of interest, no? No. No. Seeing none? Is that okay? Hearing guidelines. Who's going to present those?
The City Council is holding a public hearing regarding the adopting of the city's budget for fiscal year July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. The City Council will take public testimony on this issue and make a decision at this meeting. The hearing process will begin with a staff report by Finance Director Mark Krozik. Following presentation of the staff report, the City Council will take public testimony. Testimony will be received by supporters of the proposal first, followed by neutral testimony, and then opponents of the proposal will testify. The Council requests that all people wishing to testify approach the table and give their name and mailing address before testifying. People wishing to testify should limit testimony to not more than 5 minutes unless a longer period is provided by the City Council. Written testimony will be accepted from all parties. After everyone wishing to testify has had an opportunity to speak, the City Council will close the public hearing and enter deliberations. Once the public hearing is closed, no further testimony will be received.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing, and we'll start with staff report.
Right, so I'm just going to take it over from Mr. Krozik, even though.
As we do every year, we have 4 resolutions for the city budget. Resolution 2154 declares the city of Hermiston's intention and election to receive state revenue pursuant to ORS 221-070. If we don't pass that resolution, we don't get state shared revenue. So that's the first resolution. The second resolution actually adopts number 2155, the city of Hermiston's budget. You give us appropriation authority and you impose and categorize specific taxes for the new fiscal year. 2156 establishes the reserve accounts for the City of Hermiston Reserve Fund for 2021. And Resolution 2157 establishes the compensation plan for the City of Hermiston employees effective July 1, 2020 for the 21 fiscal year.
Okay. So first opportunity for public comment. If there are persons who would like to comment about the city budget, please come forward, introduce yourself by name and address, speak to me, direct your comments to me, and try to limit your presentation to less than 5 minutes. And we're going to start with the proponents. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the city budget? Seeing none. Anybody on the phone? Star 7. How about neutral parties? Anyone wish to speak? Seeing none. Anybody on the phone? Star 7. All Are there any opponents, remonstrances who would like to speak? Anybody on the phone, *7? Okay, callers will now be placed on mute. This hearing is closed. Is there further council discussion?
Yes, sir.
The only comment I'd make is, sometimes these decisions look like we have put a lot of thought or effort into understanding what we're accepting tonight. And we went through a budget process of which we all sat on that. It was also participatory by several committee members within the community who got to participate in that. And all the questions were addressed of the council and community members at that setting. And so we're all very familiar with this budget. I think David was even present for the meeting as well and got to hear the presentation and where we're moving forward. The one thing that I would also like to speak to is the fact that the staff has chosen to, or elected to, delay compensation. Annually we like to give when we can afford to, a raise to our staff based on cost of living. During these uncertain times where a lot of businesses are closed and 20% of the population is unemployed, they felt like it wasn't appropriate that they were getting a raise when a lot of people were getting laid off and businesses were getting shuttered. So I respect that and appreciate their willingness to delay any sort of compensation increase and hold the line. That also helps us as a community and as a city keep everybody employed and continues to be able to provide the services that we have. So I applaud the city and staff for supporting that initiative. Any other council comments? Okay, so at this point, we're going to move on to the ordinances and resolutions where we'll adopt this, right? There's no further action in that, right? Okay. Resolution 2154, 2155, 2156, and 2157 related to adoption of the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget for the city of Hermiston. Resolution number 2154 is a resolution declaring the city of Hermiston's election to receive state revenues. Can I get a motion to approve and lay upon the record?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Smith, seconded by Councilor Harden, that we approve resolution number 2154. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone? *7. Okay. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Resolution number 2155, a resolution to adopt the city of Hermiston's fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. Can I get a motion to approve and lay upon the record?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Primer, seconded by Councilor Davis, that we approve resolution number 2154. Any public comment?
5.
Sorry, 2155. Public comment? *7 on the phone. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Resolution number 2156, a resolution establishing reserve funds for the city of Hermiston for fiscal year 2020-2021. Can I get a motion to lay upon record?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Davis, seconded by Councilor Myers to approve resolution number 2156. Any public comment? Anyone on the phone? *7. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Resolution number 2157, a resolution to establish the compensation plan for the city of Hermiston employees for fiscal year 2020-2021, effective July 1st, 2020. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Been moved by Councilor Primer, second by Councilor Gutierrez, that we approve resolution number 2157. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone? *7. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. I want to thank budget staff, business office, or business officer for their leadership and guidance during this process to make sure we have a budget in place that we can balance and sustainable and is fiscally prudent. All right, so we're past 12. We did those already. Committee reports. Any committee reports?
We're having a meeting, actually, this week for Parks and Rec.
On Thursday, yes.
In person or
In person, yes.
Right on. Right on. Cool. Others?
Studies Advisory Council want to meet next Monday.
Okay. Hispanic advisor? Yes. Okay. Perfect.
Stepping Stones had a meeting, actually it was in the park, and we actually had a homeless person that attended it.
Did you?
Yeah, it was
Intentionally?
Yeah, you just had to walk over and sit, what are we doing? And it's like,
Oh, you didn't invite him to attend.
No,
You just actually stumbled across it.
And I was surprised at the number of homeless that was in the park.
Oh.
Yeah, so, yeah, but it was good. So, but my offer still stands to.
Bus ride.
Yeah, so look forward to Walla Walla.
And
Can we do wine tasting on the way down?
No, he makes you sing Wheels on the Bus all the way over there, yeah.
I know we'll have a sober driver.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyhow, but no, I think they're moving forward, and I've been encouraged by that. I know they've got a deal where they're getting their website up, and their most asked questions, and the board is ready to do presentations to go online for that. So, yeah, so just come along, and they have their, I don't know whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, sometime this week they're going to build that first one. So that's right.
We also had EOTech, Mayor, please fill in if I miss anything. We went over site plans. So we had, we came over and we did kind of Kenneth from Architects Quest came over and we went over the site plan once more. We kind of ran into the issue again of where are we going to put the RV park. So we're going over that again. We've tried to be very creative with using the triangles at the airport. For parking, originally we intended for maybe the RV park to be there, but because of the FAA, the regulations that are going on, we're going to have to reposition that, potentially still looking into that to see how to best utilize the space that we have here. Other than the RV park, Al also shared some really cool ways that EOTech is trying to diversify the revenues that they're bringing in, and some of that has been barrel racing. So there's been a lot of barrel racing that's been going on here at EOTech, and that's also kind of been a cool way to make revenue amongst this COVID times. And yeah, other than that.
The barrel racing conversation was interesting. I think he said he had like 9 barrel races in the last 10 weeks or something like that. Significant number. And if any of you had the opportunity to drive by, there was trailers parked everywhere. Mm-hmm. And Al worked really hard with the health department to make sure that this was an okay use and that he was doing everything in his power to make sure that there wasn't COVID being spread while they were here. They came up, actually the health department showed up, observed, and gave them the blessing. And so evidently everything's been going well there, and then getting creative and trying to find additional ways to cover this expense and revenue and overhead. They have had to furlough some staff in the process, because obviously you don't have venues or events going on, you don't need people helping, which has been unfortunate. I think he brought most of them back. There was some PPP plan or funds that Corey and the Venue Works agency were able to get to help revenue replacement, which has been revenue replacement of expenses to help pay for staff and some of the expenses, which has been a great partnership with Venue Works. The other unique thing we went over was budgeting and where we're at as a EOTech facility. balanced books. It was also interesting, and I think it's a celebration and a highlight that our community built this facility for $15 million-ish.
Like 18.
$18 million-ish, and we have paid it off. So in this next budget cycle, there's no capital.
Actually, the only one portion of it's still left in debt. We paid off the donations piece, the piece that was dedicated from the TPA is still being paid off.
Correct.
We have $2 million essentially for
TPA,
TPA debt.
So, I think it's a celebration for the community to have this beautiful facility not be a burden to them, not be a tax consequence to them. We didn't have to go out and bond it and ask them to pay taxes on this, and it's now paid for.
As promised.
As promised.
That's right.
Exactly. So I think you all should be applauded and celebrated for your work and effort in delivering on that promise. So that was exciting from the EOTech Advisory Board as we reviewed the financial resources. Beautification process is on a little bit of a delay. Since there's no rodeo or fair this year, there's no hurry to make sure it gets done, but it will get done. I saw Doug and Al out here talking tonight. I'm pretty sure that's what they were talking about.
They're starting.
Trees in
They're starting to work over on the kind of demonstration gardens project this week.
Yeah. And then one of the questions that came up during that wanted some more definition on had to do with the triangles and trying to get a definition from FAA on the exclusive uses in that area, and so that we can be better able to design acceptable uses for that area. So some sort of clarification on what is allowed in there or what isn't. And so we had some questions that we're just looking for some more answers on. So it was a good meeting, well attended. I think most people were there. As you guys are all aware, Steve Williams has submitted his resignation. So we are going to be going out and seeking a EOTech advisory board member, and it's an at-large position. So has that been announced already? Yes, okay. So if you are interested in participating in helping out EOTech and advisory and being a part of the city and making a difference, please volunteer. Other committee reports? Okay. Mayor's report. Couple things I was going to talk about. As you guys may remember, I'm on the League of Oregon Cities Equity and Diversity Committee, and we had another meeting here recently. Through that process, we've talked about caucuses and caucuses engagement at the League of Cities level. One of those, we signed or we supported a resolution around the People of Color caucus. I signed a resolution in support of that and sent it to the League of Oregon Cities. They currently are meeting. They don't need a caucus formation to be legitimate, but it is a way for their bylaws to recognize that group and to actually spend funds on it. So it's got to go through a process, but there is a caucus that they're suggesting, a couple other caucuses as far as like a women's caucus. And so if there are committee members or counselors that would like to participate on either of those two, I would encourage you to engage. They're trying to encourage more people to run for board positions. What was highlighted during our conversation is we will have one female on our board next year, League of Cities board, which I shouldn't say our board, Byron's board, and one person of color, and that's the ex-president. After that, there's nobody. And so trying to find some diversity in that, I think, is important. So encouraging members of not only our city council, so if there are council members that would like to participate in that, I would like to encourage you or talk to you about it. but also talking to other communities and making sure that other councils are aware that there's a need for membership. So it'll be a little bit hard this year because normally there's a nominating process and interview at the annual conference. But that process will, as far as nominations for the committee, start this fall. One of the other things I'd like to talk about too is, you know, I alluded to it earlier in my comment to Jackie. We've had some tumultuous times lately. You know, for the last couple months, we've been dealing with a COVID situation and we've been confined. And I think we've had some protests in support of that and some protests against that. And people are getting frustrated. I think sometimes some government, what they feel like are interpreted as government overreach, and also some frustration with people ignoring that recommendation and advice. We also had a situation with an incident in a police department and a young man being killed, which has created a national turmoil and argument and protest and riots and distraction from COVID. COVID is still going on, but it's definitely raised the attention amongst the Black Lives Matter organization and raised the turned the spotlight on racism. And it's created a community conversation that has become, seems like the relevance of it, the importance of it has been raised, and people are now paying attention more. And I think that's important, and I think it's important that we continue to have that conversation. The one thing, it doesn't surprise me during all of these protests that's been peaceful. That we as a community have been able to share our concerns with other community members, and it not risen to the level of anger or violence or rioting or looting or destruction of personal property or hurting of other individuals. And I so respect my community for speaking out, addressing their concerns, being heard, but more importantly, in that process, realizing that we're all humans and we're all in this together and we need to work together to make this world a better place and do so peacefully. And so I appreciate everybody's willingness and support to make sure that that happens peacefully. And I know that this puts the police officers in an uncomfortable position and makes their anxiety raised and makes them feel like the bad guys or everybody's, you know, angry at them or frustrated at them. And I want to let you know that we still extremely value you, we still extremely support you. We need you as a healthy, functioning part of a healthy community. And I can't see the conversation around communities that are having conversations about dissolution of police departments. That's not something I'm ever going to support. That's not something that I think our community is ever going to support. And we need public safety officers, and you need to know that you're important to us and that we value the work that you do every day. And we know that you put your life on the line for us every day, and that's important. And I think we need to, as a community, continue to have those conversations about how we provide a society that we all can be healthy in and survive in and be successful. And so thank you for all of those people that have participated in that. I want to encourage that conversation to continue to happen. I think it's important, and I think people need the opportunity to be heard. So that's my thoughts about where we are as a community. And I promise to you that I will continue that conversation, and hopefully in a format which will allow us to gather in a larger setting where we can have the community conversation. You know, maybe it's around a I Love My City event, which is kind of a perfect setting for building people up in unity. So I would encourage ecumenical group to take on that challenge and take on that conversation. How about council report? Yes, Manuel.
I had a conversation with Mr. Nick this morning regarding the
Mr.
same thing with the police department, because, you know, in the nation, a lot of people say this solution, and I disagree with that. I think, you know, and I really appreciate Jason. We're the first one to have the cameras. Jason's been real good to send us a report when the subject become combative and they have to use the force to control them. So I really appreciate that. The other thing, you know, it's gonna be funny. When I was a child, my great grandma used to put a smoke in the honeybees to get them out, to get the honey out. I went to the march. I was waiting there to start walking from McDonald's, and these two nice white trucks come by. They hit the pedal to the metal, and this is a smoke cloud. I was telling my wife, now I know how the honeybees feel.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yes.
I had a citizen call me, and she wants me to share some of her concerns, and she's specifically talking about the May 30th rally. I wrote down some of her exact words and how she was so frightened and scared and seeing men with assault rifles and their faces covered, and she said she was very disturbed. She doesn't want Hermiston to be represented that way. It reflects badly on Hermiston, and she says she's not the only one in town that's feeling this way, and so I needed to share that information. She feels like they're very intimidating and it's frightening. So I'm sharing that with you.
Yeah, I had similar conversations with other members of our community in email format, letter format, phone call format. You know, it is challenging when, you know, you're talking about weapons. And I'm a two-way supporter personally, but I think when you have a conversation about limiting speech and limiting opportunities to individuals, I had people reach out to me to try and shut that down. People need to have the opportunity to talk, and they need to talk about their issues, and everybody has that right. And when we start silencing one group, who gets to make that decision, and where does it stop? And so I'm so supportive of our community and the ability that we were able to communicate in different formats and from different perspectives, and we did so peacefully. And so I'm not amazed because this community does amazing things all the time, but you know, I think we are an example to the rest of the world of how to communicate with each other respectfully and do so peacefully.
Let me add a little bit. It was a different Saturday was a young gentleman given up a worker that was outside of his belt and a hunting knife. And somebody was mentioned that, and I said, you know, he has the Second Amendment allows him to do that. In the state of Oregon do so. We need to respect that. And I talked to him about it.
Yeah.
And if I may, I also have heard concerns about that. Also, very much like the mayor saying, nobody wants to be the person that is going to infringe on any rights, because, like we just said, if the shoe's on the other foot, what's one person going to do to shut, one's opinion? That's why we have our Bill of Rights and things like that. I think more pointedly, I think what frightened people, yes, were the assault weapons, but also the rhetoric that came with it. I also think, in large part, that's why the movement that happened this last Saturday was so big, because there was a lot of people that felt white supremacy was coming into town, or at least that was the implications of it. I know people might disagree with that, but unfortunately, that's the rhetoric that came with that one gentleman's past. And I had the pleasure of attending the Black Lives Matter movement. And I guess, it's for people out there, it's more than just what happened to Mr. Floyd. It's really been kind of what happens systematically across the United States. There is an example And I actually want to talk about this. A gentleman named Fathin John. He was actually one of the young black men that was killed. Unfortunately, due to an accident. An officer came. She was off duty. Was going to her apartment. Mistook the apartment number. She went to the wrong floor, right where it was actually supposed to be. So she thought she was walking into her room. The door was open. And so she saw a man in there, was frightened, and she shot the person and unfortunately killed her. What took place in the courtroom was really great. What happened is there was a lot of empathy that was shown. Actually, even Mr. John's brother embraced the officer as she was sentenced. And she was sentenced, I think, to 5 to 10 years. And, I think people around this country are upset and are angry. And anger, as I understand it, is a secondary emotion, and it comes from pain. People are angry because they're in pain. And what happened in this case when that officer was sentenced, a lot of people saw a lot of empathy play out. And I think what people are upset about isn't the empathy that was shown for the officer, but it was more of, where is the empathy for Black Americans? Where is the empathy when things like that happen? Why isn't there as much empathy for Black Americans, it seems like? And I think that's what has a lot of Black Americans in our country really hurt, is that there's systems in place where Black Americans don't feel the same treatment. And, obviously that's kind of going on a national basis. Hermiston might be different, but we're not excluded from every now and then racist behavior by certain people. Of course, I don't think that our community reflects that. But the troubling thing is we've seen it play out on a nationwide basis. And so I think this movement is just really shedding a light of racism everywhere. Of course, it's something that we need to educate ourselves about and really look at our internal biases as well. Latinos are not excluded from racism easily. There are people that can be racist, and so it's really incumbent upon us to see those biases and to change those things. Regarding defunding police, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that the movement altogether is trying to see that, there are instances where our officers, unfortunately, aren't trained enough. We've heard from our officers about mental health situations when people are in mental health crises. And unfortunately, our officers are not mental health professionals, nor addiction professionals. And putting them in situations like that is extremely difficult. I pride our department for having a lot of training. That is actually what we should be doing, is pushing our officers to more training, to more training, to more training, so they're prepared for the situations that they have to face every day. I look forward to joining a ride-along to see what happens day to day. I know several council members have already done so. But I encourage people to engage with the police department. Our police department is supposed to be a reflection of our community. So I understand there's so many people in our town, and we don't demonize our police department, because I know very well our police department is great. I've heard from so many Latinos in our area. Our police department treats people the right way. And I am very proud of that. I'm very proud to stand before you guys today and having had conversations with our police department and knowing full well how great they are, how great they operate. And so, if anything, I encourage our council, if there's any opportunities to send our officers to training, to do so. We need our officers to be well on the job. We need them to be mentally sane, to have access to those, if they need a day off, if they need a mental health day, because they go through a lot as well. So I guess in these times, I hope that we come together. I hope that we listen as well. We've had this back and forth of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, everything matters. But I think in this position right now, what Black Americans are saying is Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of things that are going on systematically that are hurting Black lives. So let's pay attention and see what we can do to help them out in these times, because unfortunately they have been disenfranchised in our history.
Be kind. That's what I think.
On a lighter note, I would like to wish Rod Harden a happy birthday
Yes.
and acknowledge 28 years to the day of continued service on the city council.
Started this when you were 20?
More like about. Hang on with the wrong teacher.
And your wife made cinnamon rolls for your birthday today. It's nice.
Yeah, she put in the work today.
Yeah.
I did help a little bit. And I just like to say, welcome to Dave. David, it's been these last 28 years, it's been a great ride. You know, the nice thing about serving on this council is that when the meeting's over, I've always had the confidence that the staff is going to do the job that needs to be done. And, you know, I never gone home worried about whether things are gonna happen or not. And so the staff has been incredible over these years. And we've done some things outside of the box. And this building is one of them. So it's been a great opportunity. It happened to be 28 years exactly. I took the oath of office and had to run for election 6 months later.
There you go. There you go. So you only got
28 years. Only got
Yeah,
20
yeah,
years.
so tag you're in.
Welcome.
Well, my birthday's this week too, so. I'll take a moment, and I hope this goes on the record, that I prefer to go by David and hate being called David.
Oh,
But I thank you for correcting yourself. I also would like to make a comment that I was not sure what to make of being on city council, but I feel extraordinarily welcomed, more so than I have belonging to any other sort of committee of sort that I belong to. So very welcomed and very well prepared from everyone who's been able to offer me extra guidance. You mentioned that I attended the budget meeting, but I also had a separate meeting with Mark and Byron to go in a little bit more detail, just the three of us, so I could get everything out in the open. So I very much value the direction the city is moving in. Also want to borrow on a point that you mentioned earlier about Administer, Chief Administer, making things more transparent about their policies, especially when it comes to uses of force. And I think the strategies that are in place are effective. So I want to compliment you for that. And I look forward to what the rest of the year brings and figure out if I still feel like staying on in August.
Yeah, let's not do anything to scare David away, right? That way we can, make this a pleasant experience for him, right?
You don't have to stay 28 years.
That's not the requirement. Yeah. What did you think when you first got on? How long?
I don't know, it was one term at a time.
Yeah.
But it was, of course, we went through some tough times, plus one of the big things, of course, was when we took over the electric department. That was something that, people said, what are you doing, bucking against this huge corporation? It's not going to work. And the council stayed together, didn't make any difference who was on the council, and we said, no, we need to go this way. And sure enough, finally they said, okay, we'll sell. And HES was born. That was probably, I think, was the biggest. And of course, it took a lot of flack during that. It was flack. It was back on it. So.
Any other council?
Yeah, the wind blew.
Really hard. Yeah.
And one of the things that I saw was a lot of people coming together to help each other out with that. It was really, wife and I, we just come back into town. We'd been over in Pendleton for an issue, and then we got hit with a hail on the way. Had to hide underneath an overpass to get before it let that pass. But we got into town, and all the trees laying over, and it was amazing. All the people that were out there, and in the following days, pulling together, helping each other out, getting those trees and getting all the limbs and everything taken care of, and just the way that our city pulled together, the members, the staff of the city out there taking care of things, the police department, fire department, everybody working together just like one big happy family, so to speak. Yeah, there's a few people that weren't happy with a few things. Some people didn't get enough the power to them as fast as we would have liked to have had it. And people lost internet, but unfortunately, it's one of the bad things that can happen on something like that. Nobody knew this was coming. There's no way to prepare for that, and I look at a lot, the inventory of our trees. Larry, is that a good way to put it? We lost a significant portion of the trees in some of our parks, and so that's a big hit to us. And so that's going to take some recovery, but the biggest plus was how everybody just pulled together to help. We had neighbors that I'd never really talked to about helping pull trees out of the middle of Hermiston Avenue so cars could go by. It was really neat. So
I would echo that. Again, it never surprises me the genuine hearts of our neighbors and the people that we represent every day. I want to make sure that we especially recognize the public safety officers, but also those linemen, UEC, the contractors we had to go out and hire to clean up trees and clear those out. Those guys worked, 3 days straight or something like that. And so I want to recognize those guys for all their hard work. Sanitary disposal. I got the fortunate opportunity to clean up a tree in my yard too. And, I had 5 neighbors show up and I didn't even ask. They just showed up. And we knocked it out, got it taken care of, and we took 3 trucks and a trailer up there and got in line with everybody else in town. And sanitary disposal was just, bring us in the front door, send us out the back door, no charge. It was just amazing. That organization put it together in that short period of time. So I want to thank those guys for their support of the city and the members that were damaged. It's our version of a catastrophe. We don't get many floods or earthquakes or hurricanes. We get hermicanes. So that was, I guess, one of the worst. Really? One of the worst that has ever been, or one of the worst windstorms we've ever seen. So, thank you to the community for cleaning up. Other comments? Ms. Schmidt?
So just a few items. Last week you heard from Mr. Sargent talking about 820 East Pine, and I asked Clint to put together just a report on what we've done with that property, and it's been on our radar for a long time, and we've had city clean it up and put assessments against the property, all those things. Our next step, it is owned by Wells Fargo, so they took it in a foreclosure and have just held on to it for a number of years. We're not sure why, so we're going to try to write a nasty letter that insinuates things we probably can't follow through on, but trying to get something done. I also have a letter from Mr. Sargent. I'll respond to him directly. I think I might sick the neighbors on the bank as well, just to, if they would just put it on the market, it would sell. In our housing market, it's a good neighborhood. It's a house. The house is sound, so we can't do anything more. It's mostly weeds. That's what we deal with. So anyway, there's a report on that. Over the weekend, I think all of you received another email from Mr. Simiotti. He was upset about not getting a written response. I apologize for that. I thought my conversation on the phone with him for about 30 minutes was sufficient to answer, to hear his concerns. I'll respond to him and copy you on response on that. As far as reopening, we are working on plans to open up city operations again in different at different levels for some of the different departments. We are going to go ahead and try to open the pool. It's probably going to be a rough financial decision, but I feel like it's a good decision for the community. And we may not, we're gonna struggle with getting lifeguards to staff the pool and different things, so it may not be exactly like we always do it, but we're gonna try to have some opportunity to use the pool. And we're also working on opening the doors at the library, as well as the temporary city hall, as well as the PD and the court building as well. So we're working to send out a plan to the public, have it ready to go by Friday, so that we can be looking to open various things over the next week or throughout the next week. I was going to also mention, all those electrical outages. It's going to cost us a lot of overtime because we had a lot of. They were working 3 days straight, basically crews. Taking the mandatory rest, but they were out there, and they were taking a tree for one house rather than fixing one line that might service 10 houses. There were so many of those houses, especially in that neighborhood across from the high school. That was one of our last ones to get back up, and so there was just a lot of stuff where a tree would knock one line out, and so they had, some of those took a long time to get to. And then I wanted to just let the council know we have started to get an agreement together with Sarah Wilson to do our community visioning project. She was the response to our RFP that looked the best. So she and I spoke today. We'll be coming together with an agreement, and we want to get to where we can have more engagement, face-to-face engagement with the community as well as electronics. So we may not be starting some of those type of events till later in the August, September timeframe, but we're going to have a plan to start that visioning process. So, and one piece of that is to have a steering committee. So we'll be looking for probably some council participation as well as some community members to participate as well. And with that, I think that's everything I had.
Go ahead. I'd like to compliment Larry as well. Got a lot going on. Riverfront Park's been flooded twice this year. Recovered from a flood last year. Had a fire burn down Funland. Trying to rebuild that, fundraise for that.
Skate park, trying to build a skate park.
Trying to get some award for a skate park. We got some funds for that, so we continue to try and build that. Then you have a catastrophe in the park with the trees. Tears up all the trees. Now we got to clean that mess up. And so, still putting on Parks and Rec programs. City manager and I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but get creative with Parks and Rec programs and get people out and about. Somebody stole the key to the city.
Oh, yes.
And so we got a
you guys need to solve the mystery.
Yeah, got a mystery to solve.
Yep.
I think
What an acting job.
Yeah. Do it every day right here. I act like a real mayor.
I'm going to teach acting lessons advanced and limited.
But I want to thank you and your staff for all the hard work. It's been a really tough year on the Parks and Rec department, and a lot of cool things are going to come out of it, though. A lot of creative work, a lot of amazing things. Can't wait for groundbreaking for the Funland Park and the official opening of that this fall. I know it's been postponed. Not going to get it done by Labor Day. Just equipment. Some states weren't even manufacturing, and so we couldn't get stuff made, and so stuff was delayed. Good news is, though, fundraising targets were met and exceeded. Community, again, it surprised me, just amazing, but it's contributed a significant amount of money, and we'll be able to recognize a lot of people in that process. There's still some pickets for sale, right? Absolutely. So if you would like to, if you haven't bought your pickets, City Parks and Rec Department, go online.
On the city's website, there's an icon, very easy to do.
Okay, go to the city's website through Parks and Rec, buy a ticket. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Larry. Pass along I'm trying to open a pool. So I'm excited. I think that's a great decision. Public needs an outlet and a resource, and the pool is kind of a rallying point too. And so I think that's a great decision by you. We do have another meeting.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so that we still need to get to. So I am going to adjourn the city council meeting and convene the urban renewal agency meeting at or after 7:30 p.m. Public hearing for HURA 2020-2021 fiscal budget resolutions. Jackie, do you have any conflicts of interest?
I do not.
Manuel?
No.
No, nobody has a conflict of interest. I'm going to turn it now over to the city staff for hearing guidelines.
The Hermiston Urban Renewal Agency is holding a public hearing to consider adoption of the Hermiston Urban Renewal Agency budget for the fiscal year July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021. The board will take public testimony on this issue and make a decision at this meeting. The hearing process will begin with a staff report by City Planner Clint Spencer. Following the presentation of the staff report, the board will take public testimony. Testimony will be received by supporters of the proposal first, followed by neutral testimony, and then opponents of the proposal will testify. We have enough people to be on both sides. The board requests that all people wishing to testify approach the microphone, approach the table, and give their name and mailing address before testifying. People wishing to testify should limit testimony to not more than 5 minutes unless a longer period is provided by the board. Written testimony will be accepted from all parties. After everyone wishing to testify has had an opportunity to speak, the board will close the public hearing and enter deliberations. Once the public hearing is closed, no further testimony will be received. I read it faster.
Good job.
Hearing is open. Start with staff report.
Glenn, anything?
There's been no change to the budget since the budget committee reviewed this in May. We've got a proposed budget of $602,725 and about 5 projects that we're doing this year.
Awesome, including a wayfinding project.
Correct.
Yeah. Excited for that. Okay, we are going to first open it up to public testimony. Are there any persons who wish to present? Please come up to the stage up front, this table up front. Introduce yourself by name and address. Limit your comments to less than 5 minutes and direct your comments to me. And we're going to start with proponents who wish to speak for the HURA adopted budget. Seeing none. Any online, star 7?
Namaste.
Any neutral parties wish to speak? Seeing none. Anybody online, star 7?
Namaste.
Any opponents who wish to speak? Seeing none. Anybody online, star 7?
Namaste.
Callers will now be placed on mute. This hearing is closed. Council, further discussion? No. Okay, we're going to move on to Resolution 12, adopt the 2020-2021 HURA budget, make appropriation, and declare the agency's election to request the maximum amount of revenues that may be raised by HURA. Can I get a motion? So moved.
Second.
David got it. All right, David, good job.
I had to get one in.
Nice, David. It's been moved by Councilor McCarthy. Seconded by by Councilor Myers, that Resolution 12 be adopted and laid upon record. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone? Star 7.
Namaste.
Seeing none and hearing none. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. No unscheduled communication, Clint?
No.
All right.